standing on the edge, ready to reclaim everything I lost and face the darkness head on. I had the window of my truck down, the radio on, enjoying some old songs as I drove back home. It had been another long week at work, where we were fixing the highway going north to the NSW and Queensland border. Laying asphalt and pavement is one thing. Digging tunnels and building bridges is the real challenge. I started out working on the road in my bright jacket, laying down tar. Now I was wearing a hard hat and a short-sleeved shirt, still in my bright jacket but holding a clipboard while overseeing the work. I was only 20 minutes from home, looking forward to seeing my daughter Katie. As for my fiancée Sally, I was not as eager. But I knew being apart was hard on her. It was tough on all of us, really. My job usually had me working around the city so I could be home every night. But a few times each year I had to go away to supervise a project. This was what all that studying had prepared me for. I graduated high school and went straight to work. University was never for me, which disappointed a lot of my family. While working, I studied part-time and eventually earned my degree in civil engineering. When I pulled my truck into the parking lot of our apartment building, everything looked normal. I grabbed my bag and walked around the shared pool to our apartment. When I opened the door, I was surprised by the silence. Normally, my lively 5-year-old daughter would be running to greet me. Sally would at least say hello from the living room or kitchen. "Hello, I'm home," I called out. I stepped into the living room. There was no one there. I checked the kitchen. Still no one. No food cooking on the stove or in the oven. I went to our bedroom and my heart sank. I hurried to Katie's room. There were a few of her toys on the floor, but when I opened her closet and drawers, they were empty. No, I whispered. "Where is she?" Sally's things were also missing. All her clothes and special items were gone. I quickly grabbed my phone to call her. It wouldn't connect and it said the number was out of service. I walked around the apartment again and then noticed a letter on the fridge. My hands shook as I took it down and read the message. "Mark, if you've seen the apartment by now, I'm sure you understand that I have left with Katie. Don't try to find us. We've been planning this for months. Your time away just gave us a chance to put everything in place. By the time you read this, we will be far away. Katie will have a new family with a new father. He can take care of us and give us what we need. Sally." I remembered that Katie had a phone. It wasn't really hers, but I could call her at night before she went to sleep. Sally had given it to her. It was one of the few good ideas she had. I tried the number. It was out of service. I called on Wednesday. Thursday. No answer. Sally too. I sighed. I looked at the letter. Who is we? Who is us? I thought. Is she seeing someone else? It sure sounded like it. I checked the fridge and was surprised to see some food left. I looked around the apartment to see if anything was missing. Everything seemed to be in place. I checked our joint account online. No money had been taken out, so I moved all the money to my personal account, canceled her credit card, and grabbed a beer. I needed to think. I called my best friend Mick. "Hello, Mark. How's it going?" he answered. "Have you seen or heard from Sally lately?" I asked. His silence told me everything. "Mick? She called on Monday to say she was leaving you." "What? And you didn't think to tell me?" "She asked us not to call you." "Why?" I was angry. "She said she was leaving for good reason." And what? Did she say why? Did she claim I was a bad person? Did I scare her? No, not at all. She just said she found a guy who could give her and Katie more. And you didn't think this was worth a phone call to warn me? Me and Simone, we agreed with her. "Some friend you are," I yelled, hanging up. "Who is us?" I wondered. I tried calling 2 other friends, and I got the same story. I couldn't believe it. I thought I had friends who would support me. No one said anything bad about me. It was just, "She said she was leaving you and not to let you know." Mick called back several times before I finally answered. "What?" I asked harshly. "Look, mate, just leave me alone," I snapped. "You're not much of a friend." "Don't lose your cool. It's for the best," he replied. "I'm not your friend," I shot back. "Just leave me." I hung up again. He tried to reach me a few more times before giving up. I called the authorities and reported my daughter as missing. I was upset about Sally, but I wouldn't lose my daughter without a fight. They asked me some questions over the phone and wanted me to come in the next day. I thought it was odd to go in on Saturday, but I agreed to be there. I sat on the couch, lost in thought. If my friends knew what was going on, maybe my family was involved too. They had never supported my choices. They disliked my love for rugby and preferred a more traditional path for me. I couldn't say we got along well. They were arrogant and looked down on me for my choices. According to my family, anything other than being a lawyer, doctor, or financial expert was disappointing. I got into my truck and drove toward the eastern suburbs, where the wealthy like to show off. Most of them were snobby people, and I was relieved to leave as soon as I could. The schools I attended nearby were filled with pretentious kids. My siblings were just like them. It's no wonder I felt out of place with this family. The knot in my stomach tightened the longer I drove. By the time I parked outside their house, I was full of nervous energy. I wasn't sure if it was a gut feeling or just knowing my family, but I felt uneasy as I walked through the gate and up the long driveway. I could hear chatter and laughter from the back. They were likely having another one of their parties. I wasn't invited anymore. I didn't fit in with their friends. At least the front door was open, so I walked inside. The house hadn't changed much in the past couple of years. It had 2 living rooms, a huge kitchen and dining room, and a study downstairs. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs and bathrooms on both floors. As I stepped into the backyard, the chatter stopped, and several faces turned to look at me. My mother instantly looked worried. My older brother stared at me, and my younger sister seemed scared. "What brings you here?" my father asked with a sneer, clearly dismissive of me. "Where's my daughter?" I asked firmly. "Somewhere better," he replied. "What do you mean, somewhere better? Explain it, please." "No need for sarcasm, Mark," my mother cut in. I hated the way she talked. I glared at her and she turned away. "Where is my daughter? Where is my fiancé?" "Your fiancé is with a better person, so your daughter is with someone who can give her a better life." "So you know what happened?" I asked slowly, making sure to articulate my words. "Of course we do. We introduced her to him last year. They left today for another country. It would be best for you to forget about them. If that's all you're here for, you can leave now." I felt overwhelmed. I stepped forward and punched him in the jaw. He fell over. My mother rushed to his side, shouting something I couldn't hear with all the noise. My sister moved back, and my brother stepped forward to confront me. I had a bit more height and strength, and seeing my expression, he wisely backed away, holding up his hands in surrender. Leaning down, I grabbed my father by the hair and pulled him up into a chair. I kept an eye on everyone else as I asked, "Where is my daughter?" "Out of your pitiful life. We've made sure she has the best of everything, better than what you could give her." I took a few steps back and looked at everyone. In that moment, I saw them differently. I had always known, but now it hit me hard. "I want to say I don't believe it," I whispered. "But—" I shuddered as the truth sank in. "Who are you people?" I asked quietly. "How can you do this to your own?" "No, not son. I refuse to believe I come from the same family as you." I looked at the woman next to him. I can't believe any mother would do this to her child, taking him away like this. I glanced down at the man. "And as for you, father, you've hardly been one to me. All you've cared about is money and status. While you may have twisted the minds of my so-called siblings," I gestured to the man and woman beside him, "you never convinced me. Life is about more than just these things. I found that out too." I grabbed him by the collar. "But you hurt the woman I loved, and now I've lost the only thing that truly mattered." I punched him in the stomach, making him bend over. "Mark, please," Cheryl, the woman I used to call Mum, said. "You knew all about this," I said, glaring at her, "so please be quiet." "I'm your mother. You won't—" I glared at her again as I pushed John back into the chair. "No, you're not. You may have given birth to me, but that's where your role as a mother ended. You're no better than him. The only reason I don't hit you is that you are a woman, and I do have some values." I held my hand near his throat. "The only reason I don't push harder, John, is that I want to see my daughter again, and it won't be from behind bars. You're not worth the trouble." I let him go as he gasped for air and turned to look at the others. "You," I said, pointing at Brian, "are just as bad. If I see you again, it will be too soon. If you want to fight, go ahead, I'll take you down. And you, Kelly, well, I'd rather not say much about you. Unworthy is one phrase that comes to mind." I sighed with relief. This has been something. "Now don't mind me, I've got a daughter to find. So here's a parting gift. I gestured at them. Let's hope we never meet again. I'm going to make sure you pay for this, John threatened. I leaned over him, glaring into his eyes, finding it amusing how he shrank back in the chair. Honestly, John, I really don't care right now. Do what you want, but I promise you this. The day I get out of prison, I will find you. I gently touched his cheek, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He understood how much I despised him. You took my daughter from me. She was everything to me. What you did shows a lot about who you are. You lost the right to call yourself a father a long time ago. I also believe that the woman behind you was involved, and those two over there probably know all about it. So do you really think I'd hesitate to take you down? In fact, I might feel a sense of satisfaction while doing it. I hit him again, and he collapsed. Without looking back, I left the house, promising myself I would never return. I got in my truck and grabbed some food on my way home. By the time I parked outside my apartment, it was dark, and I saw a police car waiting for me. I didn't plan to run, so I stepped out and walked to my front door. The officers were knocking, so I introduced myself. Mark Samuels, officers. Is there a problem? We've received reports of an incident at the home of John and Cheryl Samuels. We'd like to ask you some questions. Should we talk here or at the station? Am I being arrested? If you come with us now, we won't put you in handcuffs. All right, lead the way. It was my first time in the back of a police car, which was a new experience. I didn't chat. I just looked out the window. In that quiet moment, I realized everything I once knew was gone. No partner, no daughter, no family. I felt completely alone. Once we arrived at the station, they took my information and led me to a cell, saying I would be interviewed in the morning. I felt exhausted from everything, but I had trouble falling asleep. My mind raced with thoughts of my daughter. Was she safe? Who was she with? The most important question was, why? I had been told lies about a better life, but my daughter had been happy. I cared for her deeply, and I would have done anything to hear her laugh again. That's when the tears came. I realized they had been telling the truth. The chances of her being safe were very low if she was far away. She was gone. During the interview the next morning, after having a cup of tea, reality hit me. I felt empty. I recounted everything that had happened since I got home the previous night, all the conversations I had, the letter I had found, and the confrontation with John and the others. They knew I had reported my daughter as missing, but apparently that issue was already resolved. John and Cheryl had already come in, claiming they had left the country and were not missing. No one was missing at all. I didn't think anyone would kidnap my child, but I understood why they might act like that since I had knocked someone out. Isn't it against the law to take my child out of the country without my permission? I wondered aloud. It is, but let's just say that the guards watch much closer when people come into the country than when they leave, one officer explained. If your child is with a couple who look like her parents, especially if she's with her mother, it wouldn't seem strange at all. I spent most of the day sitting in the cell. Later, it opened, and I guessed it was late afternoon. You can go now, the officer said. Really? I asked, surprised. I thought I would have to face a court and possibly pay a large fine or spend some time in jail. John Samuels is not pressing any charges. You're lucky that's how things work here. Really? I wonder why, I mumbled, but it didn't matter now. I packed my things, signed a few papers, and after a stern warning to stay out of trouble, I left. Back at my quiet, empty apartment, I realized I couldn't stay there. The place was filled with memories of my daughter. I felt angry thinking about Sally. When we met, she seemed sweet and we fell in love fast. We had made plans to marry, but she was busy with school and work while I was often away. Now I suspected it had all been a lie. I checked my phone and saw many missed calls and messages. I deleted everything. I didn't care what others thought anymore. On Monday morning, I handed in my notice at work. My boss was surprised, but when I explained my situation, he understood. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but I realized it wasn't like in the movies, and John probably hadn't lied. Katie had been taken far away. I didn't even know where to start looking. I contacted a real estate agent to sell my apartment quickly. After that, I went online to sell anything I didn't need. Over the next month, I cleared out my apartment until I only had a sleeping bag, my phone, a bag of clothes, and a small box of keepsakes left. I kept photos of my child and me, but got rid of everything with Sally's name. I changed my last name because I wanted nothing to do with the family I once had. The real estate agent assured me she would find a buyer soon. When I returned my things at work, my boss said he was sad to see me leave. I said goodbye to my colleagues, made a post on social media about my departure, and then I headed west. I knew this wasn't going to be an exciting journey. I felt numb as the month had gone by. Several so-called friends called and tried to visit, but when I did answer, I wasn't friendly. I was tired of their excuses. In the end, I canceled my old phone number and got a new one. That stopped most of the calls, but didn't stop one last visit. When I opened the door, I saw my former best friend, Mick. His fiancée, Simone, stood next to him. He hesitated when he saw my expression, but then he seemed ready to defend himself. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't," I replied, feeling empty instead of angry. "You're going to listen to me tell a simple story and then you'll leave my life for good. Do you want to hear it or just turn around and go? Either way works for me." He glanced at Simone, and to my surprise, she nodded. "We'll listen to you, Mark." Some people think my life should have been easy. I was born with some advantages, but I quickly learned what my parents were like and what the people around me were like. I knew early on that I wanted nothing to do with that attitude, the kind of people who look down on others. I earned everything I have through hard work. I thought I had someone who appreciated that and loved me. I was wrong. But I did have a daughter whom I loved more than anything. Coming home to her made all my hard work worth it. She would shout, "Daddy," and raise her arms so I could pick her up. Just to tickle her and hear her laugh made me happy. All of you, everyone I trusted and loved, betrayed me. You have broken me. I have no family left after what happened, and I have no friends thanks to you. If I believed in God, I might ask, what did I do wrong? I never harmed Sally. I was never loud or angry. She was not a victim. And my daughter? I would have done anything for her. You took everything from me. So don't stand there and say, "We need to talk." There's nothing you can say to fix the damage you've done. I stepped closer. Be glad I'm still here. I'm struggling, and the only thing keeping me going is the thought of seeing my daughter again. You've pushed me into a dark place. I doubt you care. I moved even closer to Mick. Just go now, Michael. Leave, please. Before I do something I might regret, something that could land me in trouble or harm someone, I really don't want to think about it too much. Right now, I feel like I could go either way. Just forget I'm here, because after this, I won't think about you, my so-called friends, or my family. You all won't be on my mind. I'm ready to disappear. I waved my hand dismissively. Just go away. He stepped back and then turned to leave, with Simone following him. But before he vanished, he paused and looked back. I'm sorry. No, you're not. It's just another lie. That was the last I heard from anyone there. What I said made me go to the police station the next day, nearly begging for help to find my daughter. I ended up speaking to another officer to tell my story. They mostly said there wasn't much they could do. They told me I could talk to a lawyer, but if Sally and Katie were out of the country, there wasn't much hope. A court wouldn't be able to help. Still, since I was so desperate, they opened a case file and said they would look into it. They promised to reach out if they found anything. I suggested they talk to John and some others, giving them names. They might know where she was. I left the station feeling hopeless. It seemed like they didn't really care. I had no clear idea where to go the day I drove out of Sydney for the last time, crossing the Great Dividing Range and just heading wherever. I drove without a plan for a few days, going north as it got hotter until I ended up in a place called Longreach. Knowing I couldn't keep wandering forever, even though I'd get money from selling my apartment soon, I found a hotel to stay at and walked to a nearby pub. Standing at the bar with a beer in hand, I felt out of place, but the lady behind the bar looked me over. New in town? Sort of. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. Looking for work? I guess so, I sighed. I really don't have a plan here, I said, tapping my head. Do you like hard work? Yeah, I was an engineer, started with manual labor. There are a lot of farms around here. I know the MacArthur family is looking for a permanent worker or two. If you're ready to work hard, they might hire you. Better than just wandering, I mumbled, finishing my beer. Do you have directions? Of course, sweetie. Do you have a GPS? She nodded and wrote down an address, handing me the note. It's about a half-hour drive. I'll let them know you're coming so someone will be there to meet you. Thanks, I really appreciate it. Before you go, what's your name? Mark Smith. All right, I'll give them a call now. I'm Dottie. Hope you become a regular. The person you'll want to speak to is Bill MacArthur. He's a decent guy. Thanks. I managed a brief smile before I walked out. The hotel was just a short walk away. My truck felt like an oven, so I rolled down the windows, entered the address into the GPS, and started my drive toward a new beginning. As she watched the young man leave the bar, she let out a sigh. He had the most flat voice she had ever heard. He tried to walk confidently, but his posture seemed heavy, like he was carrying a lot of weight. But it was his blue eyes, they looked empty. There was no spark at all, just a sense of being. She picked up her phone and called the local resident. Hello? A man answered. Hi, Bill, it's Dottie. Hi, Dottie, how's everything? I just had a young man here looking for work. I told him to reach out to you. Great, we could use some extra help. Just be careful with him, Bill. We only talked a bit, but I've seen that look in someone's eyes before. You know what I mean? I've lost a few like that in the past 10 years. Good friends. He nodded in understanding. They both knew the pain of losing good people. Do you know anything about him? He asked. Not much, just his name. Mark Smith. William, Bill. The young man is on his way, Eli, Bill called to his wife Eleanor, known as Ely. New hire? She called back. Maybe. Dottie just let me know he was at the hotel looking for work. She has a good eye for people, she said, stepping out of the kitchen to join him by the door. She wiped her hands on a towel. Did she tell you much? Just his name, and that well we'll find out soon enough. A truck appeared in the distance, kicking up dust. It was another hot, sunny day, typical for this part of Australia. Sometimes there would be heavy rains, followed by long, dry spells. Still, the recent rain had brightened up the countryside. The trees were green, and there was grass for the sheep and cattle, but Bill knew he needed help with the constant upkeep. His son had left the farm as soon as he could, choosing city life. Their daughter was working toward a university degree to help with the farm when they retired from full-time work. The truck pulled through the open gate and stopped in front of the house. A man stepped out. He was tall, at least 6'2", broad and strong, likely close to 220 pounds. He had short brown hair. As he walked toward them, Bill noticed the blue eyes of the newcomer and immediately understood what Dottie meant. Mark Smith? He nodded. Yes, you're Bill MacArthur? Bill extended his hand and Mark shook it firmly. That's right, I'm Bill. This is my wife, Eleanor. Everyone calls her Ely. Mark shook Eli's hand. Nice to meet you, he said. Ely nodded in response. What brings you all this way, Mark? Bill asked. I'm not really sure, just looking for a fresh start, I guess. Where are you from? Sydney. And now you're here? He looked away, gazing into the distance. It's a long story, he said softly. Have you ever worked on a farm? No, but I have a background in civil engineering, mostly building roads. I have some certificates. I was leading a project on the Pacific Highway. Bill raised his eyebrows in surprise. So now you're interested in farm work? Long story, he replied in a flat tone as if he didn't want to share much. Bill exchanged a glance with Ely, fully understanding what Dottie had communicated. Would you like to hear about the job here? See if it interests you? I'll be honest, Bill. I'm probably going to take it no matter what. I've been wandering for a few days. Staying busy helps me keep my mind off things, so I'd like to work as much as I can. Bill nodded and gestured for him to follow. Let me show you around and explain a few things. He outlined the daily routine of farm work and mentioned that he needed someone for maintenance, fixing machinery, buildings, fences, and anything else that required attention. Mark asked a few questions, indicating some interest, though it was hard to tell if he was excited. Bill mentioned other large farms nearby and that Longreach was the closest town, about an hour away. He provided details about the salary, which he admitted wasn't very high. He also mentioned there were small cabins on the farm for workers who needed a place to stay. It was no surprise when Mark asked for a cabin if he got the job, ideally in a quiet spot. Bill led him back to his home. When can you start? Monday morning. I've booked a hotel in Longreach for a couple of nights. I can come here early, drop off my things, and get started." "Sounds good," Bill replied, nodding. He extended his hand again, and Mark shook it. "We'll see you Monday at around 9 a.m. Normally we start earlier, but this gives you time to get settled. See you then." Bill watched as the young man walked back to his truck, turned around, and drove south toward Longreach. He walked inside, took off his hat, and found Eli in the living room. Eli settled into his favorite chair and asked, "So? He's interested and starts on Monday, but Eli..." She looked at him seriously. "I've seen this pattern before, so we can keep an eye on him." He exhaled deeply. "He's come here feeling lost." His wife smiled gently. "We will watch over him, Bill. He's not the first young man who has come looking for answers. He probably won't be the last. Did he share anything about his past?" "No. He was quiet except when answering questions. He was polite. He looked strong, so the work should be okay for him. But there's something about how he walked back to his truck just before leaving. Whatever you do, Bill, don't pressure him. If he doesn't want to share, give him space. He may need time to feel comfortable with us. Or we might find him in trouble one morning," Bill said quietly. "Have faith, Bill. He's here for work. That shows he hasn't given up. Let's keep him busy and hopefully steer him away from dark thoughts. If necessary, we can help him like we have with others before." Mark showed up a little before 9 a.m. on Monday, which was a good sign. He didn't bring much, just a large backpack and a small box. He got into the passenger seat and directed Mark to one of the quieter cabins. It had electricity and running water but was quite small, with just a living room, kitchen, bedroom, and a small bathroom. "I know it's small, but it's just right for me. Thanks. Take your time to settle in. There are sheets in the cupboard for the bed. Eli stocked the fridge yesterday. You're welcome to join us for meals, but we understand if you want privacy. Can you meet us at noon at the homestead?" "I'll be there. Thanks." Mark drove him back to the main house, though it was only about a kilometer away. It wasn't a long walk, but Mark appreciated the ride. As he watched the truck drive away, he wondered what was in the box. Mark. The cabin wasn't as spacious as my old apartment, but it would work. I didn't need much room. I made the bed first, and then unpacked my backpack. I didn't have many clothes, but I expected I'd need more jeans, flannel shirts, a good pair of boots, and a proper hat. Next, I opened the box. A photo frame of Katie and me took a spot on the mantel. More photos were scattered around the rooms. I set my laptop on the small table. I needed to ask about wireless internet to get that set up. I still hoped to find my daughter. I just didn't know where to start. The world felt huge, and it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Then I sat quietly on the lone couch. There was a small flat-screen TV and a box that looked like it could connect to cable. A couple of shelves were there for extra things. The kitchen had everything I needed to cook. I hoped the small bathroom had a decent shower for my toiletries. But instead of doing anything, I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. I tried to clear my mind of all feelings. I was tired of being angry. It got me nowhere and made me feel worse. It was the same with being sad or feeling sorry for myself. I preferred feeling nothing at all. So I pushed everything away until I felt numb. I might have looked a bit lost. It felt better than the other options. The last thing I took from the box was a gun. I had bought it in a rough part of town. A colleague knew someone who knew someone else, and I met up with him in a parking lot. I had seen enough movies to know how to check the gun was safe. "Don't let it come back to me," he warned. No names were exchanged, just a place to meet. "It won't," I said. "What do you need it for?" "To end my pain." He looked at me and nodded slowly. "There are worse ways, but are you sure?" I paid him, tucked the gun into my jacket, and walked to my truck. I was a bit surprised he didn't report me, but I was planning to leave soon anyway. I placed the gun on the table. The only reason I hadn't used it was my daughter. Every day, I wondered what the point of living was if she was gone. Maybe she was better off without me. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I ended it. I knew my friends would be upset if they found me, but if I didn't feel the pain, I could just move on. I stood up and put the gun in a small drawer next to the bed. It was hidden away, but still there, just in case I wanted to end everything. Driving back to the house at noon, I knocked on the front door. Ely opened it with a smile. "Come on in, Mark," she said, and showed me around before leading me to the kitchen. Bill was already eating a couple of chicken sandwiches. He nodded at me as I sat down, and Eli offered me a plate of the same sandwiches. I thanked her, and we ate in comfortable silence. I wasn't very chatty, but Eli tried to engage me. "So, you're from Sydney?" I nodded with my mouth full. "That's quite a distance from home." "I don't really have a home anymore," I said quietly. I noticed a quick look between Eli and Bill. "It's a long story. To be honest, I'm not ready to talk about it just yet. Give me some time and maybe, I don't know." Eli patted my arm. "Whenever you're ready, Mark, just don't keep it all inside." I nodded again. "So how did you end up here?" I shrugged and said, "I was just driving around, left Sydney a few days ago, going anywhere really. I found a road that went on for a long way, so I turned north and ended up here. I felt tired of traveling and thought I could help out. I could use some money, but I haven't really used my savings." We finished our sandwiches, and Bill nodded for me to follow him outside. I thanked Eli for the food, and he took me to the barn for some simple tasks. He asked if I had ever ridden a horse, and I said I had only done it once and didn't really enjoy it. Since I was on a farm, I figured I would either be in a vehicle or on a horse, so I was okay with either. I had 3 meals each day with the couple because I didn't really have another option. I got to know the others who worked on the farm. They probably thought I was quiet since I didn't share much about myself and avoided questions about my past. I don't think they were suspicious, just thinking something may have happened to me. On Saturday, I went to Longreach to do some shopping. I found a discount store where I could get jeans, shirts, boots, and some other needs. Then I went to a grocery store. Although Eli was feeding me, my cabin had a kitchen I could use, and I really wanted some alone time. They might have thought I was being rude, but I figured they would understand that I wanted some space. Getting into a daily routine wasn't too hard. I had breakfast and dinner at my cabin, and either lunch with Eli and Bill or out in the field, depending on what I was doing. When I was with the couple, Eli usually talked a lot and Bill would nod in agreement. Eli could make me smile sometimes, but after a couple of weeks, as I was heading back to my cabin for the weekend, she stopped and hugged me. "You'll find a reason to smile again, Mark," she said softly, looking up at me. She seemed sad for me, which made me feel guilty. I quickly pushed that feeling away. "Whenever you're ready to talk, Bill and I are here for you." She let me go and headed back to the kitchen. "Do you have a family, sons or daughters?" I asked. She turned around and said, "Yes, we do. 1 son and 1 daughter. Do you see them often?" "Our son, not so much. He wasn't going to stay on the farm. He was glad to leave. We still love him and he loves us, but his life is somewhere else and we accept that. He's happy where he is and calls us often. As for our daughter, she's finishing her studies and should come home in a few months. She'll help us run the farm." "But you care about your children." "Of course, Mark. I love them completely and have no expectations from them." "So you'd never do anything so terrible that it would hurt them deeply and destroy the lives they want to build?" She walked closer to me, looking into my eyes. "Never," she said softly. "We love our children and just want them to be happy." I knew I had to leave before everything I was feeling came out. I wasn't sure if I would ever be ready to share all that. I simply nodded, turned around, and went to my truck. I pressed the gas hard, leaving a mark in the dirt as I sped off. I probably reached the cabin faster than ever before. It wouldn't be good for the truck, but I knew how to fix it. The cabin was dark. I turned on the main light, closed, and locked the door behind me. I dropped my bag and realized a hot shower was the first thing I needed. Eli's words replayed in my mind, making me feel upset and sad about a life I could have lived. After drying off and wrapping a towel around my waist, I reached for the bourbon I had picked up during shopping and settled on the couch. I turned on the TV for some background noise while I opened my laptop. The internet was slow, but it was enough. I finally decided to hire a private investigator. I knew Katie had been taken out of the country. I just needed to find out where. I had no idea how I would get her back otherwise. I was sure John and Sally were involved in something. The investigator said he would do his best to find out, but I guessed that most of his work was about tracking cheating spouses instead of digging through databases for missing people. At least he gave practical advice. He planned to send my daughter's picture to local police and investigation teams to see if anyone recognized her. Go ahead, I said. Let's see what happens. I had no high hopes, but I still wanted to believe. She might be lost, but not forever. The investigator suggested keeping an eye on John and Cheryl following their moves, and maybe asking some former friends about their whereabouts. He admitted he wasn't very hopeful, but understood my need for answers. And of course, I was paying him. The only social media I had was my old Facebook account. I was just curious if anyone would reach out. Many people noticed my absence, leaving concerned messages. These were the same friends who hadn't told me Sally was planning to leave with my daughter. I saw a message from Kelly, wanting to talk and asking where I was. It was sent just a few days ago. The fact that she still cared about me made me feel nothing. I realized she no longer meant anything to me. None of them did. I was sure she had known everything that happened. I had no doubt my older brother was aware too. He had always looked down on me. You can care about family even if you don't always like them. I always thought my brother was a bit of a joke. As soon as I got bigger than him, I wanted to show him who was in charge. He never enjoyed that. He was clever, I'll give him that. But he was always up to something shady. I'm sure he played a big part in making my life harder, and I bet he loved every minute of it. I should have confronted him again when I had the chance. I had already left him with a few bruises when I fought for the title I felt I deserved at just 12 years old. But I knew that if I kept going after taking down John, I might have really hurt him. I know this sounds aggressive, but I don't see myself that way. I think of what happened as regular sibling rivalry. He loved getting on my nerves, and I enjoyed putting him in his place from time to time. He was smart, and I was strong. After I moved out, I hardly thought about him. Kelly? I thought we had a good relationship. I knew she cared about me, or at least she used to. Sally? I never raised my voice around her. I wanted her to feel safe with me, and I made sure I never intimidated her. We had disagreements, but they always ended with us finding some common ground. Katie? She could easily have her way with me. I picked her up from school, and her teacher even called me her gentle giant. Her friends loved to climb on my shoulders while I played with them. All the mothers trusted me like I was a favorite uncle. I had many offers from them at the park. Now I wish I had accepted more than one of those offers. I sighed, downing a shot. I held the picture of my daughter and me, lounging on the couch, drinking from the bottle while clutching the photo close to my heart. I pushed my feelings down when I could, but it was tough when it came to my little girl. I kissed the picture. I'll see you again, sweetheart. One day, we'll have our time together. I knew that was a promise I likely couldn't keep. I felt lost. This is real life, not a movie. There aren't always easy answers, and I had tried my best. I contacted the police, considered hiring a private investigator, and thought about using the internet or social media to reach out. I finished the bottle and finally fell asleep. I woke up with a terrible headache the next morning, grimacing at the empty bottle on the floor. I knew relying on alcohol was a dangerous path, but I wasn't too worried about that. I placed the photo frame back on the mantel and wiped my eyes before having some toast with butter and a strong cup of black coffee. Still feeling dizzy, I walked to the main house and found Eli on the porch, sweeping the endless dirt. She looked at me and smiled. "You look rough, Mark. I feel it too. Do you need any help today, Bill?" "He's at the third barn. He really appreciates anyone helping out on the weekend." The farm had a few ways to get around. There were a couple of trucks, tractors, a combine harvester for harvest time, and 3 off-road bikes. I had some experience with those, remembering fun times with my friends on small bikes, racing around and having a good time. Riding a motorbike felt easy for me, so I put on a helmet and headed towards the barn. Bill was busy fixing some wooden boards. When he heard me come closer, he took a break and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. I took the hammer and nails from him and started working. "Got some news for you, Mark?" he asked. "Yeah?" I replied, trying not to drop the nails from my mouth. "My daughter should be here in a couple of weeks. Normally we would pick her up from the airport, but this time she decided to drive home since she's coming back for good." I think I saw her picture in the house. "Her name is Catherine, but she likes to be called Kathy. Not sure if I told you that." I shrugged, since I couldn't remember. "Looking forward to it?" "Of course. The house feels empty without my kids." I understand that, I said quietly, then sighed. Yeah, don't worry about it, Mark. There's plenty of time. He cleared his throat. Ely mentioned some questions you had. I don't know what happened, but I'm sorry. I'm not very good with emotions, but Ely seems to understand. Or at least, I think she does. I sighed again. We're not going to push you, Mark. Believe me. Trust. That's a tricky word for me, I said softly. Thanks, Bill, for not pushing. You're a good person, Mark. Eli and I can see that. We just want to help, too. I stepped down from the ladder and looked into the distance, the heat rising off the ground. It wasn't summer yet, but it was getting warm. This part of the country was known for its heat. I could manage that. Summers in Sydney were tough with the humidity. I really like it out here, Bill. It's calm. I don't want to sound too relaxed, but I think I might find some peace here, or at least some clarity. That was my hope anyway. It was either that or, well, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Finding peace sounds nice, son, he said gently. We finished for the day and went back to the house. He offered me a beer, but my stomach was still a bit uneasy. It felt unkind to refuse, so I accepted. Sitting on the porch, I settled into a chair as Eli came out with a glass of wine to join her husband on the couch. The sun began to set, painting the sky in beautiful shades of red, orange, yellow, purple, and blue. It was stunning enough to bring a tear to my eye. I couldn't help but let out a contented sigh. I won't claim I'm happy, I finally said. I'm not sure I'll ever feel that way again. But I can say that coming here was the right choice. It won't be easy. There's a lot to think about, I said, tapping my temple. But I promise I'll share everything when I'm ready. Whenever you are, Mark, we'll be ready too, Eli replied. Kathy. I enjoyed singing along to the radio since I was the only one on the road. The drive from Brisbane had been quite a journey, but I wisely decided to split it into 2 days. I left mid-morning on Saturday and planned to arrive in the afternoon. As I entered the town of Longreach, a smile grew on my face because home was only half an hour away. I was glad no one was with me because I knew my singing wasn't great. But it was a long drive and it kept me entertained. The farm was huge. It took me nearly 20 minutes to drive around the fence before I reached the entrance. The homestead looked the same, with Dad's truck parked nearby. As I passed the house, I honked the horn a few times before stopping. I climbed out and was immediately greeted by Mum, who ran toward me. "Kathy!" she shouted, almost jumping into my arms. My face was quickly covered in kisses before I found myself wrapped in a warm hug from Dad. He didn't have to say a word. I understood him without needing to hear anything. After grabbing my bags from the trunk, we carried them inside and up to my old room. It had changed over time. Most of the posters were gone, and the walls were now painted in neutral colors. The furniture looked nicer, too. I dropped my things on the bed, looked around, and felt a smile form. It felt wonderful to be home. "Mom, I'm going to take a shower first. I really need one." "Everything is where you remember," she called back. Mom had made sure the bathroom was nice and that the shower was good. Before stepping under the water, I glanced at myself in the mirror. I had shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, and some freckles across my nose. I didn't have a large bust, just like Mom, but that meant guys didn't stare at me all the time. I kept fit, and I was happy with my shape. But I was single for a reason. Not many men would want to join me at an isolated farm. I had learned about relationships during university since the options were limited back home in Longreach. I had one steady boyfriend for about 6 months, but most of my time away from home was spent alone. The shower felt refreshing after 12 hours of driving over 2 days. I loved putting on new underwear, clean jeans, a camisole, and a flannel shirt, along with fresh socks and my boots. As I headed downstairs, Dad whistled and Mom laughed at him. "Dinner will be at the usual time," she said. I was really hungry. I hadn't eaten much since breakfast, so I told Dad as we sat across from each other. He was busy sipping his drink and reading the newspaper, likely going through it for the 2nd or 3rd time that day. "Anything new in there?" I asked. I noticed a quick look shared between Mom and Dad before Dad cleared his throat. "Yeah, there's a new guy working with us. He's been here a few months. Works hard, polite, a good man." I stood up, eager to meet him. "Can I meet him? Is he around one of the cabins?" "Just a moment, sweetie," Mom said, sitting beside me. "It's not that simple. Why not? He's had some difficulties, Mom explained. He hasn't really opened up to us yet. He shared a bit with Bill last week, just a hint of what happened. He also asked me some questions that make me think, well, I'm really not sure. But is he okay? I pressed. I think something happened with his family, Mom said. I heard it might have involved a child, too, but that's just guessing as we try to understand his story. Whatever happened, it seems to have brought him here from Sydney, Dad added. I don't think he has anyone else. Then why not invite him for dinner? He likes to be by himself, Dad replied, although that probably isn't the best for him. I stood up determinedly. I'll introduce myself and invite him to dinner. We need to work together, so I should get to know him anyway. I can tell you what I've been up to at the same time. Mom and Dad exchanged another look. Is he dangerous? To you? No, not at all. He wouldn't hurt a fly, but to himself? Dad shrugged. Which cabin is he in, Dad? Number 2, he answered with a sigh. I got into my car and drove down the path toward the cabin. It had been empty for a couple of years since the last worker left to find other jobs. Pulling up behind another vehicle, I got out and walked slowly to the door. The light was on inside, so I gently knocked. The door opened, revealing a young man who looked to be a few years older than me. He was tall and seemed strong, but when I looked into his eyes, what should have been bright blue eyes, I felt a strange chill. It wasn't fear, but something else entirely. He stared at me as if seeing right through me. I coughed nervously. Hello, I'm Kathy, I said, offering my hand. He looked at my hand for a moment before taking it. Mark, he replied, his voice matching the emotion I felt in his eyes. I just got back from university and we're having dinner. Would you like to join us? I asked. He scratched his cheek, making him seem even more appealing. Then he glanced back into the cabin and sighed. He surprised me when he said, Sure, give me a moment to put on some boots. I'll wait out here. He nodded and then closed the door. I figured he wanted some privacy. A few minutes later, he came back wearing a flannel shirt and boots. He got into the passenger seat of my car, and I drove us back to the house. I looked over at him, but he just stared out the window. I knew my parents were right. I could tell he was hurting a lot. When we arrived at the house, I got out and let him in. My mom had set the table and smiled at me before turning to Mark. Her smile stayed, but I noticed a hint of sadness in her eyes. I knew my mom well. She showed her feelings easily. Thank you for coming, Mark. You're welcome. Are we celebrating Kathy coming home? Something like that. None of the other workers live here, so it's usually just 3 or 4 of us, depending on whether her brother is around. Why don't you have a seat? Dinner will be ready soon. Bill? Yeah? He called from the kitchen. Could you get Kathy and Mark a drink? Still enjoy beer, or have you switched to those city drinks? I chuckled and asked, City drinks? Where did you hear that? I've heard about those cocktails they serve in city bars. What happened to just beer and wine? I glanced at Mark. His expression was blank, but he nodded as my dad brought over a cold beer. Thanks, Bill. You're welcome, son. I was taken aback by that word. Dad didn't look at me as he returned to the kitchen. I sipped my beer and relaxed in my chair, watching Mark as he picked at the label on his bottle. His mind seemed far away, or maybe he wasn't thinking at all. Are you enjoying your time here, Mark? I eventually asked. The silence wasn't awkward, but I sensed he might stay quiet throughout dinner without a nudge. It's different, he said simply. Different from Sydney? It's quiet here. I like the quiet. So how did you end up here? I left Sydney and drove west, then turned north. After a couple of days, I reached Longreach. It seemed like a good place to stop, and then I was pointed here. He finally looked up at me, his eyes still empty. Your parents are good people. They are. He nodded, but quickly looked away again. The quiet was broken when my mom and dad brought in plates. We had roast chicken, roast potatoes, and vegetables. Mom mentioned there would be dessert later. I noticed Mark waited for everyone to serve themselves before filling his plate. He had a big appetite and soon went back for seconds, making Mom laugh. It would just go to waste if it's not eaten, she said. Mark smiled a little when he heard the joke. Mom looked at him and then at me. They asked about my time at university. I shared what I had studied and the degree I earned. I think it was more for Mark's sake than anyone else's. I stole glances at him while I spoke. He was eating, but it seemed like he was listening. I wasn't upset that my parents couldn't attend my graduation. Running the farm kept them busy, and taking a day off in the middle of the week was hard. I didn't mind much. It was better for me to come home and get to work. "Still interested in some hands-on work?" Dad asked. "I can handle it, Dad. You know I like it. I'll help you get back into it. You need to build some muscle." "I've been staying fit at the gym." Mom made a cheesecake. I looked at Mark again. It was the first time I noticed a small change in his expression. "This is really good," he said with a little warmth in his voice. I saw Mom blink quickly. "Thank you, Mark," she said softly. After that, we moved to the living room for drinks. Mom and Dad settled on the couch, and Mark took a chair while I sat opposite them. We talked about everyday life. Mark wasn't very involved, but he seemed relaxed enough with us. I could tell what Mom and Dad were thinking. We all have a way of sensing things in others. There was a deep sadness in Mark. He was just going through the motions, not truly living. I sensed this in just a few hours. Mom and Dad had been feeling it for months. When he left, he said goodnight politely. I offered to drive him home, but he preferred to walk, saying the fresh air would help him. After he was gone, I rested my elbows on my knees and said, "I can't believe I've met someone so troubled. His vibe." "Don't push him," Mom said gently. "If we do, he might react badly or shut down completely. He is slowly starting to open up. I believe he needs to. Whatever he's dealing with is really weighing him down. If he can let that go, maybe he will feel better." That night I lay in bed thinking about Mark. He could have stayed in the house, but Mom and Dad thought he might refuse. They worried about him being alone, but they couldn't make him stay with them. They knew he drank because of the bottles they found in recycling. Yet he always started and finished his work on time and did it well. Dad had him out on the farm that week using one of the trucks to take supplies and fix the boundary fence. Mark took camping gear with him, probably planning to stay out for a couple of days. Mom had handled the money matters, which would now be my main job. I also wanted to find better deals for the farm so we could earn more for what we grow. Suppliers always try to reduce our prices, so we do our best to stand firm. At the end of a long week, Dad and I would relax on the porch together with a drink before dinner. We hadn't seen Mark in a while, but I thought he might have come back and gone to his cabin. As I walked over, I saw his truck parked outside, which made me think he was home. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer, so I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. I peeked inside and called, "Mark, are you here?" Then I noticed the photos. I stepped inside and saw pictures on the walls, some small ones on the table and another on the mantel. I picked it up and saw Mark with a sweet little blonde girl. She looked about 5 years old and was really adorable. His face was bright with a smile, and you could see the happiness in his eyes. The man in the photo seemed very different from the Mark we knew now. "What are you doing?" a loud voice said. I turned quickly and saw Mark in the doorway. It was the first time I had seen him like this, and he looked angry. My hand trembled as I held the picture. "Is this your daughter, Mark?" "What are you doing? Why are you in my cabin? Why do you have that picture?" he said, stepping closer. He stood over me, strong and imposing. I nervously handed the frame to him. As he looked at the picture, his expression softened. Tears filled his eyes, and he kissed the picture, holding it tightly to his chest before turning away. Without thinking, I put my hand on his shoulder. "Mark." I was surprised he didn't push me away. Instead, he seemed to relax a bit. "I'm sorry for yelling," he said quietly. "Please just go." I hurried past him and ran home, but now I felt like I understood him a little better. When I reached home, Mom was in the kitchen doorway. "Kathy?" she said. I stopped and burst into tears. I hardly knew Mark, but seeing his reaction to the picture had affected me. Mom wrapped me up in a hug. "You snooped, didn't you?" "I didn't mean to. I was going to ask him to join me and Dad for a drink. His door was open, so I thought he might be resting." That's when I saw she interrupted. "I don't want to hear it. This is something he needs to deal with on his own." "I messed it up, Mom." She sighed gently. "Just give him some space. We can't rush him. We're not professionals, but he was starting to make progress. We'll just have to wait a bit longer before we can trust each other again." "I'm sorry." "I think you need to say sorry to him. Not me, Kathy. Go see him in the morning and invite him for breakfast. Mark." I woke up with a terrible headache, holding a photo frame and an empty bottle on the floor. I could barely remember what happened the day before. but I felt more urgent things to deal with, like rushing to the bathroom. While I was there, I remembered finding Kathy in my room. After I cleaned myself up, I looked in the mirror. Oh no, I said to myself. I had two choices. I could just pack up and leave or finally tell someone what happened. I liked Bill and Ely. I understood why Kathy was curious. I had noticed her. She was a nice young woman. She probably felt shocked when she found me. Seeing her in my room, holding that picture, made it clear how my cabin looked like a memory of my daughter. In a way, it was a reminder. She wasn't gone to me, but I might not be in her life anymore. A light knock on the door pulled me back to reality. I opened it to see Kathy standing there. Her eyes widened as I realized I was only in my underwear. I almost smiled at how flustered she seemed. Her cheeks turned bright red, but she didn't look away. It made me feel a bit better. "Mark, I'm sorry," she said. "Do you want to come for breakfast?" "You're sorry?" "For entering your space and asking things that were none of my business. I shouldn't have come in. I'm really sorry." I nearly smiled at how eager she was to apologize. "Give me 5 minutes, okay?" She returned a small smile. "Okay." I quickly put on some clothes and stood in the living room, looking at the photo frame. Kathy had figured it out. I hadn't said anything, but she probably guessed the picture was of me and my daughter. Sighing, I took the photo and hid it behind my back as I joined Kathy outside. We walked to the farm in silence until I stopped her a little way down the path. "You don't need to say sorry," I told her. "I do. I shouldn't." I held up my hand. "I know your parents are curious. They've been kind to me, but I'm not sure how to share everything." I looked into her eyes. "Kathy, they changed my life completely. All of them." She took my hand and squeezed it. "Will you feel better if you talk about it?" "I don't know. I'm embarrassed. I'm angry. I'm hurting. I sighed. Admitting that I sometimes wished things were different didn't feel right. The only thing keeping me going was the hope of seeing my daughter again. She squeezed my hand again and led me to the farmhouse. Ely was happy to see me and gave me a hug. I had started to enjoy her hugs. I couldn't remember the last time my mother, Cheryl, had shown me any kindness. I could count on one hand how often John, my father, had cared for me. I think Kelly was the person I felt closest to, even though I regretted what I had said to her that day. She had just happened to be in the way when I was upset. We sat at the kitchen table while Ely served bacon, sausages, eggs, and hash browns. We ate quietly, sipping our coffee or tea until I asked the three of them to meet me in the living room. After they left, I took a moment to gather my thoughts before joining them. I sat down in a spare chair and took a photo frame from my bag. With a deep breath, I turned it around and handed it to Bill and Ely. Ely took it, and I noticed her eyes filled with tears. "You really do smile," she said softly. Catherine Katie Sally Samuels was born 5 years, 9 months, and 23 days ago. She is my daughter. The last time I saw her was the Sunday night before I left Sydney. I worked as a civil engineer, mostly building or fixing roads. When I came home that Friday night, I found my house empty. There was no fiancé, no daughter, just a note from my fiancé saying she had taken our daughter and that I would never find them. She hinted at an affair. Before I keep going, I need to share a bit about my background. My parents are very wealthy. In fact, they have way too much money. They are quite arrogant. Sorry for my language. "Feel free to say what you want, son," Bill replied. I managed a small smile, probably the closest I had come to smiling in months. So, anyway, my father, John, made his money as a partner in a law firm. He earned a lot of money doing whatever he did. I never paid much attention to it. Cheryl, the woman who was my mother, is a doctor with a successful practice. She makes a lot of money, too. My siblings and I grew up in luxury in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, surrounded by people who thought they were better than everyone else. If John lived in the UK, he would probably want to be called Lord John Samuels. What a pretentious man. Then there was my brother Brian. I never liked him, and he didn't like me either. The only person I could get along with at home was my sister Kelly. No, get along isn't quite right. I liked her, and I think she liked me too. I've been around arrogant people my whole life. School? It was terrible. I hated it. They tried to force me into activities that rich people do, but I wanted to play rugby league. My father was furious when I told him that. No son of mine will play a working man's game. That was what my father said. He never supported me, but a friend helped me, so I kept going. That was just the beginning. The expectation was to get great grades and go to university to become a lawyer, a doctor, or someone in finance who makes a lot of money. Honestly, that never interested me. I was always good with my hands. I did well in my technical classes at school. I enjoyed working with tools, wood, and metal. I excelled at those subjects. I even took extra classes at college because I wanted to go into engineering. You don't always need a university degree, or you can study part-time while working. John and Cheryl didn't like that at all. If I didn't do what they wanted, they would practically cut me off. So I left home as soon as I could. I graduated high school with good grades and found a job. I started at the bottom, worked hard, and slowly moved up while studying. During that time, I met Sally. We met at a pub and got along right away. By the time I was 20, I owned our little apartment, and Sally had our daughter, Katie. Life seemed good. We were building our lives together on our terms. I always believed we were a team. John and Cheryl didn't like that either. Gradually, they started to interfere in our lives. I knew Sally might start to listen to them, but I never expected it to go as far as it did. I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I noticed Eli holding a photo close to her. I saw Sally start to change, and I knew John and Cheryl were behind it. We had some arguments, but I thought she loved me and saw that we didn't need a lot of fancy things. John and Cheryl? Not exactly a happy couple. I always suspected Cheryl was seeing someone else. Brian had already gone through a divorce. As for Kelly, who knows? She seems to change partners every few months. It's why I called her what I did. So back to my story. I came home to find an empty apartment without my daughter. After reading the letter, I couldn't care less about Sally. I'd thought she might be unfaithful, but I was focused on working hard for our family, so I brushed it off as just my fears. I shook my head, thinking about what I learned in the next few hours. Bill stood up and stepped out for a moment, then returned with a beer. I thanked him and drank down half the bottle. After putting it down, I noticed my hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists and took a deep breath. I called some old friends. They all knew what she was doing. None of them had the courage to tell me. She didn't say I was hurting her. She was just leaving with my daughter. I couldn't believe it. I told them all to go away in the end. Some friends, right? I then went to see my family. I couldn't believe what I heard. John and Cheryl had introduced my wife to the man she ran away with a year ago. A whole year. They said I wasn't a good provider and that this new guy could give Sally and Katie a better life. I knew exactly what that meant. He was some wealthy guy they met, and it felt like they were getting back at me for not doing what they wanted. John never told me his name or where they went. By the time I was done talking to him, he was out cold, and I shared my thoughts with my family. I haven't seen or heard from them since. I did spend a night in a holding cell because the police were waiting for me at home. I was surprised I wasn't charged. I sometimes wished I had been. I had wanted to settle things with that guy for years. Anyway, after that, I needed to leave Sydney. I had no partner, no daughter, no family, and no friends. So I sold my apartment, got rid of anything I didn't need, quit my job, and hit the road as soon as I could. That's how I ended up here. I finally looked up. Ely was in tears. Kathy was almost sobbing. Even Bill had tears in his eyes. I'm still looking for her. The police haven't been very helpful. I call them every week and hear the same thing, no news. I'm left thinking they don't care or believe I'm to blame for what happened. I hired a private investigator to help, but so far he hasn't found anything. He's not very hopeful, and I'm not either. But I won't give up. My daughter is out there somewhere. She was 5 years old when she vanished. She's old enough to remember me when she grows up. I worry that her mother is filling her head with lies saying, "Daddy didn't love you." I know my little girl, though. She knew I loved her. I will always love her no matter how far apart we are. I took a sip of my beer. Every day I go back and forth between two thoughts. The first is that I just want to give up. What's the point in going on? I've lost everything, but my daughter was the only thing that truly mattered, for my own flesh and blood to take that away from me. It's hard to describe how terrible that feels. The second thought is that there is always hope no matter what. It's that hope that keeps me going. If you give up, you'll never see her again, Kathy said quietly. I'm hopeful but realistic, Kathy. The world is huge. Where could they be? They might have gone anywhere. I think it's fair to assume they went to an English-speaking country, but that still leaves many places to search. We sat in silence for a few moments. "Your own parents," Bill finally said, shaking his head. "They never wanted me to follow my own path. The thing is, I was a good kid growing up. Mostly. I got good grades and rarely got into trouble at school, even though I hated where they sent me. I showed my older brother, who was in charge, a few times, but besides that, I did what I wanted. I expected some parental support and guidance while I chased my dreams. However, I knew they never really approved of Sally. So, moving on from her felt like killing two birds with one stone. They cared a bit for Katie, but I'm not sure why. In any case, John and Cheryl don't matter to me now. I feel like a 25-year-old orphan. I stood up and sighed. I needed some fresh air. I stepped out onto the porch and looked around. The sun was already up. It was going to be another really hot day with no clouds in sight. The insects were chirping, but besides that, it was almost silent. I had grown to appreciate this quiet. It was so different from the city, where there was always noise. I noticed Kathy beside me. She looked at me and then hugged me, resting her head on my chest. She was maybe 5'5" and, to be honest, quite beautiful. I guessed she was around 20 or 21. I hugged her back, closing my eyes and enjoying the feeling of being held for a moment. "Do you want to cry?" she asked softly. "I'm all cried out, Kathy. Now I just feel empty. I can't even get angry. I'm sorry for yelling at you yesterday. It was just, I wasn't ready to talk. But this morning? You figured it out. I didn't think you'd share it with anyone, but I knew it might come out, so I just had to deal with it. How do you feel now?" "Like complete mess, but it's better than feeling nothing at all." I leaned back. "So, what do you think?" "I know you have deep love for your daughter, and that's what truly matters. All those other people, they don't deserve your time." She held my hand gently, squeezing it. "You have us now, Mark, if you're willing to stay for a bit. I just shared all of that so I won't just disappear now. Your parents are good people. They remind me of the parents of some friends I had, the kind that really love and care for their kids." She laughed at that. "Actually, I should thank you." "For what?" "It may not have been the best way, but it gave me the push I needed. I've been feeling sorry for myself for too long. That's understandable given the situation. I want nothing more than to see my daughter again. But while I'll keep hoping something good happens, there's a part of me that says to remember her but also to keep living. So I will live and not forget, but I need to find a way to move forward." Eli and Bill showed up. Eli wrapped me in a long hug. "You're a good person, and I know you would have made a great dad," she whispered. Her words hit me hard, and I let more tears fall. "You've hugged me more since I came here than in my whole life." I started, but she quieted me and held me even tighter. "Thank you," I finally said. I had been carrying that weight for months. Letting it out felt freeing in a way. Bill, Eli, and Kathy had only heard my side of things, but I hoped they believed me. Since I arrived, I felt like a zombie. It was clear I had been through a lot, but I felt a bit better about life after that. In the next couple of weeks, I noticed changes in myself and the people around me. I wouldn't say I smiled much, but I felt lighter. I still couldn't bring myself to laugh. I couldn't remember the last time I had. I did notice that Kathy came to get me for breakfast every morning. I started to see her in a different way. It felt like she cared about me, and after everything, that surprised me. Eli greeted me daily with a warm hug. One time, when I hugged her back and gently squeezed, she began to cry. When I asked her why, she told me not to worry. Bill and I dealt with the summer heat together. I missed shearing season, which only happened once a year in spring, but Bill said I could try it next time if I wanted. We spent our days moving cattle and sheep around and taking care of the farm. Sometimes I would stay away from the farm and enjoy camping. Kathy had been giving me a few horseback lessons, and honestly, I felt like a real cowboy as I rode a few kilometers away to check on the fences. "Mark, in the time you've been here, have you gone into town, aside from shopping?" Kathy asked one Friday night at dinner. I shook my head. "Would you like to join some friends and me at the RSL on Saturday?" I looked into her eyes, surprised by the hopeful look. "To be honest, I've hardly left the farm. Sure, I'd love to." "Great, it's a plan!" Eli laughed as Kathy blushed and looked away. I chuckled, and it surprised everyone. Kathy stared at me until I looked back and smiled. My cheeks hurt. I couldn't remember the last time I had smiled. I was soon hugged by both Eli and Kathy. "He smiles," Eli whispered. "And laughs," Kathy added softly. I felt a bit nervous the next afternoon. I missed plenty of nails while hammering, enough that Bill took the hammer from me and told me to go back to my cabin. He thought I might hurt myself, or both of us. "Get ready for your date," he called out as I walked to my truck, chuckling to himself. I took a shower first, then picked out my clothes. I chose clean jeans and a nice short-sleeved shirt. I thought Kathy liked a bit of stubble, so I used an electric razor to tidy up. A little cologne, deodorant, boots, and a light jacket completed my look since summer evenings could still be cool. When I arrived at the homestead, Eli asked me to wait in the living room. Bill handed me a beer while I waited for Kathy. She didn't keep me waiting long. She walked down the stairs in a lovely red summer dress that fit her well, stopping above her knees and showing off her legs. She wore sensible shoes and had a nice tan from working on the farm. Her makeup was light, and her hair looked great. I stood there feeling a bit stunned, which made her laugh. "Ready, Mark?" Yeah. "Are you okay to drive us, Dad? And I'll pick you up. Don't want you driving home after drinking. Call us whenever." "Thanks, Bill." "Thanks, Dad." Bill turned on the air conditioning as we got into his truck. It was a single cab, so I sat on the left, Kathy in the middle, and Bill was behind the wheel. As we drove, I felt Kathy lean against me, and I looked at her more than once. She stared out the front window. When I lifted my arm, she leaned in closer. I glanced at Bill, and he nodded at me. The RSL wasn't the biggest place I'd been to. I was quickly introduced to Kathy's friends, 4 couples. When someone asked who I was before I could speak, she said, "Mark is my date for the evening." We enjoyed a nice meal before heading to the bar. The food was simple but well cooked and tasty. That was what really mattered. When I offered to pay for Kathy, she smiled, and when she placed a soft kiss on my cheek, I felt myself blush. It had been a long time since someone had done that. Later in the bar, Kathy made sure her seat was next to mine, lifting my arm so she could lean against me. I noticed her friends watching us with curiosity, but there was also approval. I just shrugged a little. She was a lovely young woman and also the daughter of my boss. I worried about what could happen. I was still feeling lost. What could she see in me? Our conversation flowed well, and then one of the guys shared a funny story from his farm. It was a great tale with a fantastic ending. I laughed hard and felt relieved. Suddenly all eyes were on me, and my laughter released all the tension I'd been holding in. Before I knew it, I felt Kathy's arms around me, comforting me, and her lips brushed my cheek again. I had no idea how long I stayed quiet, letting tears fall. "Sorry," I murmured. She shushed me gently. "After everything you've been through, it has to come out sometime," she said quietly. I cleared my throat and wiped my eyes with a napkin before looking around the table. "Great first impression, right?" A few awkward smiles followed. "All right. I'll grab some drinks. Then I think I should explain what happened." "Mark, you don't have to." "It'll be good for me, Kathy," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Plus, I guess I owe them an explanation for why the tall, big farmer is in tears." After getting drinks and coming back, I sat next to Kathy. I took my wallet out and handed a photo to Emily, who was across from me. She looked at it and smiled. "That's my daughter, Katie." Then I shared the same story I had told Kathy and her parents, but this time I kept it brief. Just the essentials. Kathy held my hand the whole time, leaning against me. I answered a few questions about what had happened, expanding on certain details, before Ben finally asked, "So do you know where she is?" "No, not at all. The police were not helpful. No sign of her or my daughter. They can't tell me if they're even in the country. They think they're not, but I feel like I'm on my own. It seems like they don't care. I called off the private investigator a couple of weeks ago because I was spending too much without any answers. It wasn't his fault. He didn't have much to go on. He said he'd let me know if he found anything from abroad, but it feels like looking for a needle in a haystack, and I don't know enough about the law or what to do. I'm not sure if I have any options left. All I really have is hope." Thankfully, my story didn't bring everyone down, and when the place was about to close, we called Bill to pick us up. The men shook hands with me, and all of Kathy's female friends hugged me tightly, wishing me well. We were the last ones there when Bill showed up. Once we were back at the farm, he drove me right to my cabin. "Thanks, Bill." I cleared my throat and asked, "Kathy, would you like a drink? I can walk you home after." She kissed her dad's cheek. "Good night, Dad," she said, getting out of the cab. "Have fun, kids," he replied before driving away. I scratched my head, pretty sure he winked, but I wasn't sure who it was for. When I opened the cabin, I turned on the light and held the door for Kathy as she came inside. I took her hand since she looked a bit nervous. "You're invited this time?" I whispered, squeezing her hand again. "Come. I want to show you some photos." They were varied, but the ones I showed were the most important to me. Every birthday, whether hers or mine, the first day of preschool, the first day of primary school. I never missed the big moments. I even printed some of the photos I had saved on my phone. Kathy seemed impressed that I could remember each day and everything about the photos as I showed them to her. "She's my daughter," I said. "I remember everything about her. It's all stuck in my mind." I tapped my head. I had to clear my throat. Drink." Kathy held onto my hand and turned me to face her. A smile began to show as I looked into her eyes. "You look good, Mark. I'm glad you kept the stubble." I sighed. "Kathy," she hugged me tightly, "I'm here because I want to be, Mark. Isn't that what matters? I don't know anymore." She lifted her head and rested her chin on my chest. "All I know is, the next woman you love, if you love her even half as much as you love your daughter, she will be very lucky." She placed a hand on my chest. "You are a good man, Mark. Everyone can see how much you care for your daughter. You work hard on the farm every day. Even when it's tough, you never complain. You're more caring than you think." I kissed her. I liked her. I found her appealing. My thoughts faded when she kissed me back, wrapping her arms around me. She smelled wonderful, a mix of perfume and a natural scent. After a moment, I whispered, "Stay the night just to rest. I can get you one of my shirts." I wasn't planning on leaving until tomorrow morning, one way or the other, Mark. I chuckled and hugged her tightly. "I wasn't planning on letting you leave until then either," I admitted, hearing her giggle. I found a large shirt for her, watching her go into the small bathroom while I quickly changed and climbed under the blankets. She came out a couple of minutes later, having washed her face. The shirt was just long enough to cover her, but showed off her legs. She looked beautiful. Her eyes sparkled in the soft light as she joined me in bed, immediately curling up against me. She giggled. "Happy to see me, Mark?" "I am now." She noticed the picture on the side table. "How old is she there?" "4, I said, wrapping an arm around her waist, feeling her head rest under my chin. "It's the last thing I see before sleep and the first when I wake up." I swallowed hard. It reminds me that I don't want to give up. She gently took the picture and held it up for me. "Kiss her good night, Mark." I did it before Kathy did the same. "Good night, Katie. Daddy still loves you," she whispered, placing the picture back. Kathy turned to hug me for a few minutes. She was too good for me. Why was she in bed with someone who often felt so lost? "Mark, listen to me," she whispered. "You have so much to live for. You have my mom and dad. They care for you very much. I can see it. And you have me. I'm not going anywhere. All I want to do is hold the gentle giant in this bed, keep him safe just like I know he would do for me and his daughter." I kissed her softly, feeling her leg move up by my waist as I pulled her close. Her tongue danced with mine, exploring. I felt warmth close to me. I was feeling things I hadn't in a long time. When I leaned back, I was a bit lost for words. She smiled and said, "Finally, that kiss felt right. I've noticed how you look at me, Mark. It feels strange. Dad really admires you, Mark, and Mom loves you a lot. They're better parents than mine," I whispered. "So we'll be your family," she whispered back. "Or at least, in-laws." "And what about you?" I asked, looking into her eyes. "Your girlfriend," she said simply, stroking my cheek. "I can see some life in your blue eyes, Mark. I've been waiting to see it. Slowly, I know it will take time, but I want to see the same man I saw in those photos. Maybe one day soon he'll look at me the same way." She cuddled with me as I reached over to turn off the lamp. Holding her close, she barely moved before I felt her breathing change, and she was asleep. A smile spread across my face in the dark. I felt joy, laughter, and tears. I was allowing myself to feel again. That talk with her parents meant I could no longer hide. I had to face everything. It also meant I could admit something else. I was falling in love with her already. She was beautiful, smart, had a great sense of humor, and seemed to care for me in return. In fact, I believed her feelings ran deeper than just liking me. I wasn't sure I was ready for that yet, but I liked her. I trusted her, and she accepted me, flaws and all. I don't know how long it took me to fall asleep, but the next morning I awoke to soft fingers on my cheek. Opening my eyes, I saw her smiling at me. I kissed her immediately, and it was a joyful moment. She was wearing a simple shirt, and I noticed it was quickly taken off. Just as I was about to lean down to her, she sat up and pulled me back. "Mark, I only want one thing this morning." She looked at me and smiled. "Trust me, I'm excited." I felt a rush of feelings as we shared a sweet moment together. It was amazing. I thought I had a connection with Sally, but Kathy was truly something special. I couldn't take my eyes off hers, only looking down to see us close together. "You feel amazing," I whispered. "Mark, I've been waiting for this since the first week I came home." I paused for a moment. "Really?" "Yes, I felt a strong connection right away." "I thought you were really beautiful too." "I hope so." I stayed in the moment longer than I expected, but when I finally reached a high point of feeling, it was intense. Kathy had to cover my mouth because it had been a while for me. Since it had been a while for her too, I pulled away gently and helped her with my fingers. She kept kissing me as I helped her feel good, making cute little sounds before she found her own high point. "It's been months for me too," she shared. "Shower?" I asked. "Then breakfast. Get ready for some questions or jokes." We walked hand in hand back towards the farm. Eli and Bill were already at the breakfast table. They exchanged a knowing look when they saw us. Once our plates were in front of us, Eli sat down and Bill cleared his throat. "Move in, Mark," he said. "What?" "We can see what's happening and we don't want to make you too uncomfortable. But it's clear you care for each other. We understand you want privacy, but don't you feel alone?" I looked at Kathy, who smiled back at me. When I returned the smile, she took my hand and squeezed it. I enjoyed her gentle touch. "Yeah, I guess I am," I said softly. "Kathy?" her mother asked. "I'm tired of being alone. It would be nice to have someone to cuddle with." I looked at her parents. "Are you sure about this?" Eli laughed softly. "Mark, you're 25, right?" I nodded. "My daughter is 21. You're both adults. More importantly, you make her happy. If living here makes her happy, then that's great. We want you to be with us." I glanced at Bill, who was grinning, then back at Ely. "I wish my parents—" She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Let me take care of you," she whispered. "I've been doing it since you got here. Now we can just say it and I can show you the care I want to give you. I'll move my things after breakfast." Packing my cabin took less than half an hour. I made sure to take everything. Moving into Kathy's room, it wasn't as cluttered as I thought it would be. But since there was an extra room, her brother's old room, it made sense to put my clothes there for more space. As for my photos, Kathy took the one of my daughter and me that had always been on the mantelpiece, saying it would go downstairs. When the box was almost empty, I asked her to meet me and her parents downstairs. Before she left, I had to say one thing. "I'm going to upset you." I took the bag out of my backpack and opened it to show what was inside. I had learned how to take it apart and put it back together. It was pretty straightforward with just a few parts. After that, I took a deep breath and went downstairs. The three of them were waiting at the dining table. Kathy looked a little anxious, and her parents seemed curious. I took everything out of the bag, and it was clear what it was. They said nothing, just waiting for me to speak. I left Sydney because I felt my life there was over. I traveled here because I thought this would be the end for me. I got this illegally. You might not want me to stay here now, but I need to tell you the truth. I came here to end it all. Kathy took my right hand, and Eli took my left. The first few months were really tough. I had two thoughts in my mind. I wanted to give up, but I also wanted to see my daughter again. Every evening back in that cabin, I would sit on the couch with three things in front of me: a picture of my daughter, a drink, and the object I had. I thought I could put it together even with my eyes closed. I didn't want anything to go wrong if I decided to end it. I thought about it more times than I want to admit during that first month. The only thing that kept me going was the idea that if I ended it, my daughter would be left without her dad. That thought was what helped me get through. I looked up, and Kathy let go of my hand for a moment so I could wipe my tears. Then after a couple of months, my thoughts changed. I still wanted to give up, and I still wanted to see my daughter, but I did not want to leave Eli or Bill to find me like that. I couldn't do that to them. They welcomed me into their family and treated me with kindness. Bill is like the father I always wanted, and Eli has shown me more care in the short time I've known her than anyone else ever did. I realized that leaving them to deal with my choice would be very unfair. I turned my gaze to Kathy. Then you came home, Kathy. After just a couple of weeks with you, my feelings changed again. Now I had 4 thoughts, and the third one was what stopped me from wanting to give up. I don't want to die anymore. I want to see my daughter. I want to stay here with Eli and Bill. And I want to find out if Kathy would want to share her life with me once she truly knows me, not just the broken person I was when I first got here. With that thought, I took apart the object one last time and hid it. But I needed to be honest with all of you. I had a feeling about what you might have been thinking, son. I told Eli the day you arrived. I'm not angry, and neither is Eli. We didn't know how painful things were for you, but it was clear that you were facing something terrible. What you shared with us that night only confirmed our worries. Kathy stood up and motioned for me to move my chair back. She sat sideways on my lap and kissed me. Once she settled down, resting her head against my chest, I looked into Bill's eyes. Please hide this somewhere I can't find it, Bill. I don't want it anymore. I don't want to feel like this anymore. Everything I need is here. I have you two, and I hope I have Kathy. You do, she whispered softly. Then there's just one thing we need. We know what that is. I can wait. It will happen one day. I won't give up, but without news. I sighed. I just don't know what else to do. I'll have one of the others take it away and bury it deep, Bill said. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Not necessary, Eli replied. What you just told us was brave, Mark. You could have hidden it and said nothing, to admit something like that. It took courage, son. Thank you for trusting us. I thought I'd never trust anyone again after everything that happened. Coming here was the best choice I could have made. Thank you because you 3 saved me. Not just for me, but for my daughter. All I ask is that you look after mine in return, Mark. I'll spend my life doing that, Bill. Kathy looked at me and smiled. Sounds serious, Mark. I am, because I love you. The smile that lit up her face made her look beautiful. I love you. We kissed, and it was long enough that by the time we pulled away, her parents were gone. She led me upstairs, closing the door behind her before snuggling against me. I wrapped my arms around her, giving her gentle squeezes. I sighed, feeling content. I feel good. I took a deep breath. Saying that felt good. I knew there could be risks, but once you kissed me, it felt like a heavy weight lifted off me. All I feel now is hope, Kathy. I hope to see her again. You will, Mark. Somehow you'll find each other. 5 years later, Kathy Mark never checked his social media. He kept it because he had a small hope that his daughter might find him one day. I knew everything about him now. He was my husband and I was his wife. There were no secrets between us. He still had tough days, but I didn't blame him, nor did our parents. After everything that happened, some wounds on his heart would always be there. Since I confessed my love for him and our celebration as husband and wife, I made a promise to love and cherish him always. We still worked the farm together. Mark was happy working alongside my father and the others. He really enjoyed shearing season as he made good money helping the other farms. He generally disappeared for a month, but he called me every night. Sometimes he just wanted to chat. Other times he liked to hear my voice. He also spoke to our 2-year-old son. I think I would have gotten pregnant in the first year if I hadn't been on birth control. Once he found that spark and energy he used to have, he became a different person. When I saw the light return to his blue eyes and looked at me with the same love, I felt an even stronger connection. When we weren't at work, we were quite affectionate. Thankfully, our parents never caught us, but I think they had an idea. With my rosy cheeks and Mark looking so happy, it was likely clear. As I thought of this, I gently touched my belly. We already knew we were having a daughter. He nearly fell apart when we heard the news. He felt guilty for being excited about another daughter. I reminded him that our daughter was not a replacement for Katie, who was still out there and still his child. Through everything, he never lost hope. He had searched so much, wishing for a miracle, but still hadn't found anything. Mom and Dad loved their grandson. Bill and Mark were more than family now. Mark called him Dad, and Eli was Mom. When he said that for the first time, she hugged him for at least half an hour. They both cried, especially Mom, when he told her he loved her more than he loved anyone else. We knew there was no love left for anyone else, except for one person, maybe just her. I didn't push the topic right away, but I started hinting since our son was born. Mark was quiet but thoughtful. He always considered his words before speaking because he didn't want to upset me. Mark wasn't into social media, but I kept an eye on it for him. He admitted that was a way Katie might get in touch someday. Every week since he had been away, his sister left a message for him. Each one was different, and I could feel her sadness through the words. She always ended by saying how much she loved him and missed him, hoping he would reach out one day. As for the rest of his family, they didn't reach out at all. They weren't on his list. A few friends would leave messages asking where he was and if he was okay. He asked me not to share much on the site, just that he was alive. He didn't want to share where he lived or that he was married. He even left his new name off. On the website, he was still known as Mark Samuels, a name I knew he disliked now. Kelly had left another message just the day before. I looked at her profile again. She was quite nice looking, only a couple of years older than me. She didn't seem to have any kids, and her parents didn't appear to be on the site either. Her brother was a tricky subject, and I didn't want to get into it. Mark had told me he had no brother and that he had new parents. I remembered him saying he was a 25-year-old orphan. Hearing that made my heart ache for him because he felt so alone. I wouldn't reach out to her without telling Mark first. He knew Kelly left messages, but he didn't say much about it. He was never rude to me. He was a good person at heart. Still, I could tell he felt bad about the things he had said long ago. His sister had been caught in his anger, which he later regretted. It was a moment of hurtful words. During dinner that night, I waited until we finished eating before speaking up. Mark was now 30, still strong and fit, with a bit longer hair and a sun-kissed complexion from working outside. His blue eyes seemed to shine even more. Sometimes when he looked at me, I felt a rush of warmth. "Mark, can we talk about something?" I asked. "Sure," he replied. "It's about—" I took a deep breath. When he noticed my hand shaking, he gently held it. "Sweetheart, I don't like seeing you nervous around me," he said softly. I had witnessed Mark's anger before, but I knew it was okay to feel emotions. It was how we handled them that counted. The only time he was really upset with me was when he found me in the cabin. Work sometimes frustrated him, but we learned that coming home to a happy partner always lifted his spirits. I only got shaky when we discussed his past, as that seemed to be the only thing that could truly bother him. But he never lost his temper in front of me. When he did need a moment, he'd excuse himself and take a short walk, kicking at the dirt to calm down. When he saw me watching, he'd smile. He was my gentle giant. "It's about your sister, Kelly." I watched his face for a reaction, but he stayed calm. He was good at keeping his feelings hidden. "She's still leaving messages every week. For the past 5 years, there has been a new message every single week." I took another breath. "I think I should reach out to her for you." I looked at my parents, who were also watching Mark. He slowly stood up. "Excuse me for a moment," he said softly. "Mark?" I asked. He leaned down to kiss me. "I'm not angry, sweetheart. I've moved past that. I just need a few minutes to think." "Okay. I love you. I love you too." He always left the room saying he loved me. Once he stepped out the back door, my mom glanced at me, holding her thoughts back. She understood this could open old wounds for him, or even be difficult to handle. I was left wondering if things had really changed with Kelly. Maybe this was a chance for them to talk and figure out what had happened. He came back with a beer for himself and Dad, and a bottle of wine already opened for Mom and me. He sat down, took a sip of his beer, and gazed into the distance for a few moments. None of us pushed him to talk. Then he nodded. "All right, send her a short message. Let her know who you are. Ask what she wants. I'll reach out when I see her online. Is there anything you want to know?" "Not really. But if she's serious, I think you should meet in person. Not here. Not in Sydney. There's no way I'm going back there." How about Brisbane? That works for me. But let's see how serious she is first. You can read people well. I can't face her myself. Is it all right if I contact her soon? Just like a Band-Aid. Quick and easy. I waited until the next evening to check if she would be online. When the little symbol turned green, I opened a chat window and started to type. Marks. Hello, Kelly. Sam. Mark! Oh my gosh, I never thought. M. It's not Mark, Kelly. This is Catherine, but you can call me Kathy. I'm his wife. K. Mark's married? Oh, hello, Kathy. I guess you know who I am then? AM. I know you're his sister. Mark doesn't really use social media much, but he left this page for people to reach out to him. I've seen your messages to him. He finally decided to respond because he's curious about why you keep messaging him. He thought he had made his feelings clear. He had explained in detail what happened that day at their house, what he said, what he did, and what was said to him. He admitted that as time passed, he felt some regret about how he spoke to his sister. He still had no feelings for the others, but hinted that maybe one day he would reach out to her. M. Before I continue, Kelly, I need to know one thing. This will determine if we keep talking or not, so please be honest. What did you know about what happened? K. Honestly, not much, but I couldn't tell him because my parents threatened to cut me off if I did, but I wanted to tell him. I never agreed with what happened. After he disappeared, everything fell apart. I hate my parents for what they did to him. I always loved him the most. M. Do you know where his daughter is? K. If I did, I would have posted it on his wall, Kathy. But they never told me all the details, and I've never been able to figure it out since. I leaned back. It sounded sincere, but written words are different from hearing a voice. What she was saying matched her messages from the past 5 years. M. Kelly, I have to be honest. What happened to him, what your family and his friends put him through, it broke him deeply. He was lost, barely hanging on for months. The only thing that kept him going was the hope of seeing his daughter, my parents, and later, me. K. He was feeling that low? She added several crying emojis. I could see how heavy it must have been for her to hear that. M. Yes, that's how far he was pushed. While I really want to believe you, I need to feel sure of both your regret and your love for him. That's why we need to talk. I need to hear it in your voice. Mark isn't ready to speak yet. Getting him to agree to let me reach out to you was a big step. K. But he agreed, right? That must mean there's some hope? M. There's a chance, yes, but my parents and I protect him fiercely. He's been through so much. I'm giving you my phone number, so please call me tomorrow evening. As I said, Mark isn't ready to talk yet, but I'm here to listen. Show me that you're genuine, and I'll speak to him about it. K. I'm really glad he has you, Kathy. Thank you for taking care of him and for loving him. M. He's a good man, and he loves me just as much. Here's my number. Call around 7 p.m. and we'll talk. K. Of course, I'll call. I've wanted to hear his voice again and maybe even see him. I've thought about this moment for years. Thank you, Kathy, for giving me a chance. I've saved your number and I'll call tomorrow. Logging off now so I don't bombard you with questions, but one last thing, please let him know that I still love him and that I miss my brother. M. I'll tell him, Kelly. Speak to you tomorrow. That night we lay side by side laughing together. Mark, who often called me sweetheart or sweet petite, had a playful sense of humor that I loved. Though he took a while to open up, he quickly became the warm, thoughtful partner I adored. For me, he'd always be my gentle giant or honey bun, a name that made him smile every time. For us, this bond was a refuge, a chance to share warmth and kindness that we'd both missed for so long. In that moment, as we lay close, I could see how far we'd come together, and it made me grateful for every part of this journey. Given that I was often quite excited, we definitely made a lot of noise. After we both enjoyed a special moment together, I cuddled against him like I always did, his hand on my stomach and mine on his. Your sister will call me tomorrow night, I said. That's fine, he replied, sounding very relaxed. It was the best time to bring up something like this after we had shared that moment. He was more open then. He knew how things worked. After our time together, I could probably ask him for anything and he would agree. Although, I would do anything just to see him smile at me. I was still very much in love with my husband. I could tell he was thinking about it during breakfast the next morning. Our parents noticed too, but they didn't ask any questions. Before he left with my dad, he kissed me, told me he loved me, and reassured me that everything was okay. He wouldn't listen in on my conversation, but he wanted to hear about it after. Whatever I said, he would trust me and we would go from there. I felt a bit nervous as the time approached. I hoped I wasn't making a big mistake. Mark said he was as happy as he could be, even though someone was still missing. But he pushed that thought aside. He was focusing on the present and hoping for good things to come. There was no changing the past. At exactly 7 p.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. When I answered, I wasn't surprised to hear a shaky hello. When she heard my voice, she started to cry. I could feel for her because I sensed she was being honest. She loved her brother, missed him, and felt guilty about what happened. I waited for her to calm down before asking some basic questions about her life, allowing her to adjust to talking with me before we got into the details. "Can you tell me about that day, Kelly? The day he came to the house?" I heard her take a deep breath. I had never seen Mark so upset before. The anger in his eyes when he walked into the backyard to face my parents was shocking. My parents? Interesting choice of words. Oh, they are not his anymore, Kathy. I know he doesn't care for them now. His picture is no longer in their home. Dad still feels bad about not following through on his threat to take action. But the fear still lingers. Mark really frightened him. You know about that? I do. Mark is usually gentle, but some people can really push his buttons. She cleared her throat. We all knew about it, Kathy. He was always around. His name was Tony, but I never learned his last name. He and Sally were involved from almost the very beginning of their meeting. Our parents set it all up. Mark usually stayed home with Katie when Sally visited, so he didn't know anything. Whenever Mark did show up, Tony was visiting but was careful to keep his distance. Now, about that day. Mark walked in, but he seemed really upset. When Dad told him what happened, Mark just lost control. He hit Dad hard. Honestly, I wasn't shocked. I think Mark had wanted to confront him for a long time. The only reason he didn't hit Mom is that he would never hurt a woman. I knew Mark would have gone after Brian if he got the chance, but my older brother was too scared of him. That night, everything came out. Mark saw the family for who they really were, and then he called me a terrible person. He feels bad about that, Kelly. Truly. But I deserved it. I was part of it. I didn't mean to be, but I was. I never told him because I was scared of losing everything. I played a part in watching my brother's life fall apart because of cruel parents, a harsh fiancé, and a man who took her away. I never thought she would take Katie, but I knew our parents didn't really want Sally around. This was their way of pushing her out. They hardly ever cared about Katie, and it was almost like they were getting back at Mark for wanting to live his own life. Wow, your parents sound terrible, Kelly. I can't stand them now, she said quietly. They ran him off. And I helped. Kelly began to cry again. I let her take a moment to gather herself. What happened after that? Word about what happened got around slowly. It took time, but I helped spread the news to ease my guilty feelings. I shared stories about what they did to my brother. Once people saw that Mark was gone, they started to connect the dots. No Mark, no Sally, no Katie. Dad almost lost his job when his firm found out what happened. Mom's practice is struggling because her patients wouldn't see a woman who treated her son like that. Brian has already been through 3 divorces. We make sure each wife knows what kind of person he is. And what about you, Kelly? How are you holding up? I've carried this guilt for 5 years, Kathy. Every day I wish I could go back and tell him the truth, but I was too caught up in myself. We were close when we were kids. I felt he accepted me for who I was. But when he looked at me with such anger and called me a terrible person, I didn't blame him. After what he heard, I understood. I looked in the mirror and hated what I saw. Gradually, I pulled away from the family. When was the last time you saw them? I haven't seen my parents in 2 years. I haven't seen Brian for even longer. Dad's parents actually supported what they did. I haven't seen them since that night. Mom's parents, a different situation, at least when they were alive. They're gone. They watched from afar as their family fell apart. I doubt Mark knows they both left us within a year of each other 3 years ago. Nana always hoped she'd see him one last time, but understood why he left. They just wanted to know he was okay. He's okay, Kelly. I make sure of that, as do his kids, whether they are born or not. You're expecting? She whispered. 6 months along. We have a 2-year-old son and are expecting a daughter." She started to cry again. I couldn't blame her. She had missed a lot of his life. "Kelly," I said softly, "this will take time. I'm not sure Mark will want to talk on the phone. He said that if he agrees, it would be in person. Where are you living?" "He doesn't want that shared, but it's clear he's not in Sydney. He hasn't been back since he left. I get messages from old friends asking if I've heard from him. I always say no. Keep saying that. He doesn't want anything to do with them. I heard his closest friends knew about what happened. Let's just say the guys he used to play rugby with were upset about it. They just want to know he's safe. Let them know he's happy. Only tell those who are not involved or who don't know. I have a list of people he would prefer to avoid. Kathy, I'll do anything to see my brother again. I don't care what I need to do. I just want to hug him and say I'm sorry. I know after 5 years it might not mean much." "It would mean a lot, Kelly." Over the next 2 months, Kelly and I talked a few times each week. She was eager to know what Mark was doing. After confirming with him, I told her we lived on a farm. That made her excited and didn't surprise her. Mark always loved working outdoors. My parents thought that kind of work was beneath us. I messaged her quickly when I was in the hospital, ready to give birth. To be honest, Kelly was very eager to meet Mark. She figured out to an extent where he likely was, but didn't ask after that first chat. She was being careful. Mark still hadn't talked to her, but he sent messages. He knew it was awkward for me, and he apologized each time. I also understood what he had gone through. "I need to trust her, Kathy," he said softly one night just before I ended up in the hospital for our second child. "I'm getting there, but she was involved. I still can't be certain." I kissed his forehead and assured him I understood. I'm glad I could talk to his sister. After I had our daughter and named her Michelle Catherine Smith, I was only in the hospital for a few days before I was able to go home. Both of my pregnancies had gone well, which I appreciated. I noticed how Mark was so caring towards our daughter, whispering promises that he would always be there for her. As I watched him look down at her, I felt tears in my eyes. I knew there were still some things inside him that hurt, but once Katie came home, I thought things would feel complete. 3 months after returning home, I asked Mark to sit down with me at the kitchen table. I must have sounded serious because he sat down almost shyly. It was sweet, and I chuckled as he gave me that smile that made his blue eyes sparkle. I took his hand and looked at him. "Let's invite your sister to come visit," I said. "Sure," he replied right away. I was surprised, and he laughed a bit. "I think it's time, sweetheart. We can drive to Brisbane, and she can fly up from Sydney. We'll meet her at the airport and make a weekend of it." "Are you sure?" He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "It's time. Mark." I hadn't spoken to Kelly in a long time. I felt a bit guilty about it, but I knew that Kathy and my sister were getting along well. They had developed a friendship, and I sometimes listened in when Kathy put her on speaker. I was aware of what had happened in Sydney after I had left. Kathy and Kelly planned everything together. I thought driving would be a hassle, so we decided to fly from Longreach to Brisbane. This way, we would arrive before Kelly landed at the same terminal. Ely and Bill asked if we would take her back with us. I told them we would meet in Brisbane first and see how things went, then I might finally tell her where I was living. Once we set a date, I booked the flights. I knew traveling with a newborn could be a challenge, but I figured the flight wouldn't be too crowded. Kathy and Kelly kept chatting until the Friday before our meeting. I was there listening as usual when Kelly said goodbye. "I love you, Mark." I cleared my throat. "I'll see you tomorrow, Kelly." I heard her sniffle, and Kathy took my hand. "I look forward to meeting you tomorrow," she added. "Me too," my sister said softly. "I have to go now." I felt nervous that night. After the kids were asleep, Kathy helped me unwind, and we shared some quiet moments together. I cherish my wife and loved seeing her happy. But there was a good reason why we wanted to feel close. She knew that having fun with her helped me feel relaxed. Once she had her fill, she cuddled into my side and softly said, "It'll be okay, Mark. I promise." As we boarded the plane, I carried my daughter and held my son's hand. Kathy knew I disliked being away from her when I was at work. Every time I came home, I kissed my wife, hugged my son, and cuddled my daughter. I was grateful to work on the farm, so I rarely had to miss a day. I still went out occasionally for a couple of nights, but that was rare. Bill had one of the other guys do it more often now. We landed in Brisbane in the late morning. I had never been to Brisbane before, so it felt new to me. Kathy had visited a few times, so she would take the lead once Kelly arrived. My son Matthew was very well behaved during the flight. Michelle had slept the whole time against me. I noticed Kathy glancing at me often, our baby resting on my chest and our son sleeping beside me. "You want more?" she asked. "If you do, then yes, I do too," I replied with a grin. "But what about the farm?" "Mark, you can easily manage it with Dad. I love taking care of you and our kids. Once they're older, I can get back into it. Or we can try something new. What would Mom and Dad think? It will be ours soon enough. You know Dad has already mentioned that, right?" I nodded. Her brother, Chris, wasn't interested in the farm and had already been told. He was fine with it. "Dad is thinking about retiring soon. Farming is hard work. He wouldn't mind if we sold it and moved east for an easier life." "You sure?" "I'm just thinking, Mark. You're not the only one who thinks deeply." I chuckled and gave her a gentle kiss. "I love you to the moon and back," I whispered. "Only to the moon," she teased. "To the sun? Better." We waited in the arrivals area for Kelly's flight to land. Once it did, we moved toward the door where she would come out. Kathy took Michelle from me and held Matthew's hand as we waited for Kelly. The screen showed that the bags from the flight were being unloaded. That's when I started to feel nervous, holding Kathy's hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "I don't know how to react," I confessed quietly. "My advice?" I nodded. "Just give your sister a hug first, then let it out." I chuckled softly. My wife always gave good advice, and I trusted her. A few people came through the sliding doors before Kelly finally appeared. She looked around 2 times before slowly spotting me. She looked good, though a little pale compared to what I remembered. Her blonde hair was still very bright, and her blue eyes were just like mine. She was still short and slim. She approached us slowly, her bottom lip starting to tremble. I felt Kathy's hand on my back, gently guiding me toward her. She stopped right in front of me, looking up with nervous eyes. She seemed to shake a little, almost from fear. When I raised my hand, she flinched, which made me feel bad. But then I gently ran my hand around the back of her head and put my other hand on her back, pulling her close. When she started to cry, it got really quiet around us. My shirt quickly soaked up her tears as I leaned down to kiss the top of her head. There was no point in trying to say anything at first. She was too busy crying. I felt tears rolling down my own cheeks. I regretted what I had said before. I knew my sister wouldn't have wanted what had happened. She wasn't quite a victim like I was, but I understood her family's influence. Eventually, she leaned back, and I used my thumbs to wipe her cheeks. I bent down to kiss her forehead, which made me start crying again. I hugged her tightly once more. "I'm so sorry," she said through her sobs. I shushed her for now because I knew how sorry she was. We would talk later. For now, I kissed her head again and held her tighter. In that moment, I realized I had missed her too. When she settled a bit, I pulled back again and saw her smile slightly. "You look good, Mark. You're more tanned. Are you okay?" "No, not really, but right now, yes." I wrapped my arm around her waist and turned to my wife. "Kelly, meet Catherine, but she likes to be called Kathy, my wife. We've been married for a little over 3 years. And this is my son, Matthew. He's 2. And this is Michelle, our daughter. She's almost 4 months old." Kathy handed me Michelle and gave my sister a hug. Kelly started crying again. Kathy also had tears in her eyes. They were familiar with each other despite only chatting on the phone. Then my sister knelt down to greet my son. He looked up at me, unsure about her. I nodded and smiled, which encouraged him to hug her. Kelly cried once more as they embraced. After the introductions, Kelly turned back to me, looking for support. "You're staying at the same hotel as us. I took care of everything except your flight. 2 nights. I already got the rental car parked outside. We'll check in, settle down, and then talk." She hugged me tightly again. I softly caressed the back of her head and whispered, "It's okay, Kelly. I know everything. But we still need to talk." "I know," she whispered. "But I understand it wasn't you. Deep down, I know it wasn't you. You were the only one I truly liked in that family. It took me a long time to let the anger go." I gently lifted her chin so that she would look me in the eye. "I'm sorry for the things I said to you. I know I owe you that apology." You calling me that made me see things differently, Mark. It was hurtful, but it was also something I needed, if you thought that about me. We got into the rental car, and after setting up the GPS, I drove us to the hotel. It wasn't a fancy place, but it wasn't cheap either with the savings I still had. Kelly had her own room next to mine. My son was on his best behavior, even for a 2-year-old. Kathy fed Michelle before I knocked on Kelly's door to see if she was ready to go out for dinner. As we pushed the stroller along, Kathy held my left arm. I looked at Kelly, and she signaled back with her eyes. She wiped her cheeks again, so I stopped to give her a kiss on the cheek. "It's okay," I said softly. "You should hate me. All I want is to hear your side, Kelly. From you." We chose something simple for dinner. Pizza from a little Italian restaurant, not one of those big chains. Michelle was awake and making noise. My son tried to be a little mischievous, but with just a look from me, he settled down. I ruffled his hair, called him a good boy, and he smiled while coloring the paper he was given. When dinner came, we all stuck to soft drinks. Kelly started to tell me everything she remembered. Some of it I already knew. She talked about Tony, describing what he looked like and how he acted. He was much older than Sally and me by at least 20 years. It seemed clear that Sally's parents had chosen him. "He bought Sally's affection," she said. "Gave her all kinds of gifts, mostly things to show off how wealthy he was. On top of that, my parents were constantly saying how awful you were. I couldn't believe it, Mark. They tried really hard to break you two apart." "Why?" was the only question I could think of. "You upset them by living your life your way. At least that's what I think. I never got a clear answer from them, just bits and pieces. They disliked that you didn't want their so-called gifts and wanted to make your own path. Not like Brian, who still relied on the family. And you?" Kelly looked down and then away. Resting a hand on her shoulder, she met my gaze. "I'm alone, Mark. I don't see my family. Most of my friends left once they found out what happened. It was a big scandal, Mark. A real scandal." I took a deep breath. "Do you know where my daughter is?" She looked like she might cry, so I pulled her close for a hug again. That confirmed it. She didn't know. If she did, she would have told me right away. "I've tried," she said between sobs. "I've done everything to find out. But they have kept quiet for 5 years. Brian must know something, but I haven't spoken to him in years." Then she laughed lightly. "They knew you hired someone to look after them. He wasn't very good at his job." "Great," I muttered. "The police interviewed us more than once about everything that happened. Mom and Dad downright denied having anything to do with your daughter being taken. Sally admitted to cheating on you, and that she left the country with Tony and your daughter." She laughed lightly. "He really dislikes you, Mark. I mean, he truly hates you. I hardly care about him, Kelly. He's not my problem anymore. What about Cheryl? I think she feels a bit sorry. After all, she did give birth to you. But she's not foolish. She knows the relationship is over. And Brian? He really dislikes you. It's hard to say who hates you more, him or Dad." "And how about you?" I asked gently. "I've missed my big brother. We always got along, even after you left home. At that time, I thought you were making a mistake. Your life could have been easier, but now I see why you did it. I respect that now." I could hear her sigh. "I've felt guilty for 5 years. I should have stood up for what I believed and told you the truth. But Dad and Brian scared me. They threatened to throw me out, cut me off completely, and take away the help they gave me. Dad showered me with gifts to keep me quiet. I've grown a lot in 5 years, Mark. I'm not the same person I was then." I sighed too, rubbing my sister's back, also comforting my wife as she snuggled closer. "Do you have an idea where she might be?" I asked. I can only guess. About Tony's voice, I couldn't place it, but I don't think he was American. If they traveled anywhere, it might be Europe. I don't believe he was English either. If he was, he spoke plainly. The thing is, I don't think Mom and Dad have ever cared about visiting Katie. They never came across as grandparents who were interested in her. I don't think they cared about anyone but themselves. I had a private investigator keep an eye on Sally's parents. Eventually, he asked them if they'd heard from her. They said she vanished without a word and had no idea we had split up. From what I learned, that sounds about right. "Do you trust them?" she asked. "They always liked me." "Yeah, I believe them, especially since he mentioned he was working for me. After that, they opened up a bit. Most of what they said wasn't helpful, but I enjoyed hearing some messages. I later called just to say goodbye. They wished me well and hoped I would find my daughter someday. Back at the hotel, Kathy and I put the kids to bed before she suggested I talk to my sister more. With the kids in the room, there was really no chance for anything else. She noticed my expression and chuckled. Wait until we get home, then my husband will see how much I love him. Did I ever mention how much I love you? I'm pretty sure you tell me at least 6 times a day, Mark. I might have to increase that number. Go talk to your sister. She needs her big brother. She squeezed me tightly. Can I suggest something? Sure. Why not invite her to the farm? Okay. I could tell my quick answer surprised her. She leaned back a bit, but the smile. I believe her, sweetheart. My sister didn't deceive me. I see it as more of a secret than a lie. I want to trust her. If she breaks that trust, she's gone from my life. It's that simple. That earned me a gentle kiss. I definitely want to talk more when we get home once the kids are asleep. I'm guessing afterwards, we'll be a bit more intimate. Yes, Mark. But only if we plan for another baby afterwards. We want to make that happen soon, right? Give me a couple of months to feel like myself again, and then yes, definitely. Before heading to Kelly's room, I made a stop at the hotel bar to grab a bottle of wine and a few beers. Knocking on her door, she opened it wearing a comfy robe and looking quite lovely. Her face lit up when she saw the wine. As we sat on her bed sharing our drinks, she leaned against me and we caught up. I shared everything that had happened, which brought on many tears. I didn't hold back. She wanted to know, and she needed to understand my struggles. More than once I held her as she cried. It didn't feel great to share, but she insisted I open up. By the time I finished, it was after midnight, and we were both worn out. She slipped under the covers while I sat on the edge of the bed. Tomorrow, let's just enjoy being together. No more talk about the past. It's all behind us. I don't want to go back, she said. I want to be closer to you. One step at a time, Kelly, but it makes me happy to hear you say that. I love you. I leaned down to kiss her forehead. I love you too. She needed another warm hug after that. The guilt I felt showed me I cared, I whispered while holding her. I thought I felt nothing from your messages, but that was a lie I told myself. I tried to hide my feelings, but that really doesn't work. You messaged me every week, Kelly. That alone shows what I mean to you. I can open my heart to you too. No wonder she chose you. She fell for someone who was broken, Kelly. She helped me heal. When we returned to the airport on Monday around lunchtime, everything felt like a thing of the past. Kelly was already talking about packing up and moving, but first, she had an invitation to come visit us at the farm to meet my parents. When I called them Mom and Dad, she understood why. Within 3 months, Kelly was flying into Long Reach Airport. We had shared everything with Eli and Bill. Kathy and I told them about our first meeting in Brisbane, and they were eager to talk to Kelly too. Soon, we were chatting online with video calls, and I felt sad that Kelly was alone while the 4 of us gathered to talk with her. However, Eli and Bill thought she was great and were excited to meet her. At the small airport, it took only 5 minutes for Kelly to get off the plane and come to the baggage claim. When she saw me, she dropped her things and hugged me tightly, laughing as I picked her up with ease. As I grabbed her bag, I joked, "Did you pack a kitchen sink? You're here for a week, not a year." "I'm a woman, Mark. I always pack for any occasion," she replied. Once she settled into the passenger seat of my truck, she quickly got to see what the outback looked like. I glanced at her to watch her reactions to the wide blue sky and endless farmland. The weather wasn't too hot at this time of year, but the sun was bright. I could enjoy the fresh air with the windows down. As we pulled into the driveway, Kelly gasped at how big the homestead was and laughed while I explained that it would take hours to walk to the edge of our property. After I honked the horn, Kathy, Eli, and Bill came out to greet us, and Kathy hugged her warmly before we introduced everyone. Within minutes, Kelly felt like part of the family. Bill, in particular, felt like he had gained another daughter. Kelly had a wonderful time on the farm that week. She spent a few hours working on her laptop, but joined Kathy, Bill, and me outside every day. Though she had some experience riding horses, we took her out to ride one afternoon and showed her the thousands of sheep we had along with the cattle grazing further away. Kathy planned a dinner in Long Reach on Friday night for us to meet some friends, and Eli and Bill happily offered to babysit again, so Kathy and I could enjoy a quiet evening. Kathy seemed to have a plan. She introduced my sister to one of her friends, Jim, who was single. I knew Jim well, and he was a great guy. They hit it off quickly, and by the end of the night, my sister was clearly smitten. I exchanged a glance with Kathy while the two were chatting as we got ready to leave. "You set that up," I whispered. "She mentioned wanting to move closer," Kathy whispered back. "I thought I'd give her another reason besides her handsome brother." When Jim kissed my sister, the smile on her face after they parted suggested that she would be visiting often. After saying goodbye on Sunday when she flew back to Sydney via Brisbane, I stopped at the RSL and ran into Jim. He was a bit shy at first. "So, your sister Mark. What about her?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I was ready to have some fun with him. "She's single, right? She wouldn't have kissed you otherwise, Jim." I looked at him closely. "Do you like my sister, Jim?" He looked even more uncomfortable, making the others laugh. "Well, yeah, she's nice." "You think my sister is nice, Jim?" He met my gaze and smiled. "Yeah, Mark. I've never met a girl like her before." "Did she give you her number?" He hit his forehead with his hand, and that made everyone laugh harder. I sighed. "Hand me your phone, then. Seriously, have you never tried to ask a girl out before?" He almost dropped the phone as he pulled it out of his pocket. I saved her number, then returned it to him. "Jim, if you hurt her feelings, you'll regret it." "Yeah, Mark, of course." He rushed outside, likely trying to call her right away. I looked around the room, and soon we all burst into laughter. He came back half an hour later wearing a smile that suggested something exciting. 8 years later. Mark. I checked my watch. "Kids, if you think I'm leaving without you just because you're taking your time, you figured out quickly that I will carry you to the car if I have to." Michelle was the first to come down the stairs, looking as sweet as ever. She was a lot like her mom in many ways. Ricky, 2 years younger than his sister, followed with his big school bag weighing him down. Matthew was last, moving slowly as usual. At 10 years old, he was already getting into trouble. I knew the reason. He wanted to stay at the farm and watch Dad work, dreaming of being a cowboy. Kathy came along with our 3-year-old Samantha. Only our youngest stayed at home, but she would go to preschool in a year or two. We weren't planning on having more kids. After our 4th, I decided it was best to stop. My wife insisted I needed regular checkups. "Sometimes you look at me and I worry I might get pregnant again," she would tease. Once everyone was buckled into the car, I drove them to their primary school, where they were in different grades. Kelly was there to greet me as usual, along with her 2 kids. She moved to Longreach 6 months after meeting Jim. She was expecting a baby soon after and married him 3 months later. It was a quick romance, but she had fallen in love, just like I had. Jim was committed to her, and Kelly loved the outback life, thrilled she could do most of her work online. Once a month, she traveled to Brisbane for meetings, but otherwise she stayed close to family. Our family. She had stopped talking to those in Sydney completely. The last family meeting was for me, one final try to find out where my daughter was. I felt like I had tried everything. The police? No help at all. I'd reached out to both local and federal agencies more than once. Private investigators? No luck there either. Searching the internet? Also nothing. The courts could do nothing for me, but I never lost hope. I kept looking online, sharing her picture everywhere I could. I got a few messages, but none led anywhere. John and Cheryl stayed quiet about everything. This didn't surprise me. They figured out why she was asking about something, and they told her not to come back. She responded with strong words, saying she was embarrassed to be part of their family and made sure to let them know exactly how she felt. I liked hearing that story now and then. Eli and Bill had become like parents to Kelly, while she called Jim's parents Mom and Dad. They loved her just as much. Back at the farm, I walked inside and found Kathy on the phone. She seemed amused when she noticed me and quickly hung up. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw her blush. "What's going on?" I asked. "Secret," she replied. "A secret, huh? A secret that I can find out if I tickle you? Don't even think about it." I moved closer, and she stood up and dashed outside. I laughed and jogged after her. Bill watched us, chuckling. She didn't run far before walking back toward me, looking as if she was serious about not wanting to be tickled. "Not even a tiny tickle?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, so I wrapped her in a hug. "Trust me," she whispered. "Always. Is it a good secret?" "Absolutely." I thought for a moment. "Well, my birthday is coming up. Does it have to do with that?" "Maybe. I'll take that as a yes. You know I don't ask for much. Just a day with family and friends, maybe some beers and a nice big steak. I think I can manage that." Kathy picked up the kids while I worked with her father. He talked about wanting to retire soon, although I had heard that for the last 5 years. I knew he didn't want to work too hard, but leaving would be hard for him. What surprised me was that he didn't pressure Kathy and me to take over the farm. He mentioned selling the place and splitting the money so we could live comfortably elsewhere. "I've always wanted to retire by the ocean," he said. "I've only seen it once." At least he and Eli had their own little cottage, generously giving Kathy and me the opportunity to raise our family on the farm. Bill and I discussed the cottage plans because I wanted to make sure they had enough room. Eli often said they only needed a small place for peace and quiet, and she was right. They spent most of their time at the home anyway. Sitting back on the porch and enjoying some cold drinks, Bill asked, "If I decided to sell everything and give you and Kathy a good amount of money, what would you do?" I looked at the label on my drink before staring out into the distance. "I really don't know, Dad. It would depend on what Kathy wants, to be honest. Have you talked to her about this?" "I have. She'd stay home until Samantha starts school, then she'd look for part-time work. She'd take the kids to school, pick them up, and find something she could do from home. She mentioned you might like to go back to your old job. She has hinted at it, but I wasn't sure if she was serious." Maybe I said too much now. "Nah, it's okay, Dad. I'm not sure Kelly would be happy if we moved here only for us to leave a few years later. I guess it would depend on Jim, too. He's smarter than he thinks. Plus, there's always manual work available." He took a sip of his drink. "Just some thoughts from an old man, son. Don't stress about it too much." "Have you received any offers?" "No, I won't know until I put the land up for sale. Once I do, though, offers will come in quickly. If someone really wants it, they might even offer a lot of money. The largest cattle station in Australia was priced at around $16 million a couple of years ago. We could get a nice amount for this if we find the right buyer." That night, as Kathy curled into me after the kids were asleep, I told her about my talk with Bill. It wasn't the first time he brought up selling. "He's feeling tired," she whispered. "I think he doesn't want to put all the pressure on us." I gently touched her stomach, which had returned to its shape quickly after Samantha. "What do you think?" "I love living here, but part of me thinks a simpler life for our kids might be nice. Not in a big city, but a coastal town would be great. Like Dad said, somewhere near the ocean. The kids would certainly enjoy that." She turned to snuggle closer. "These are just ideas, Mark. Dad won't sell any time soon. He's just being thoughtful in his old age and wants to care for his family. I decided not to worry about it for now." "So what's the secret?" I asked. "You'll find out soon enough." She kissed me softly. "I love you. I love you too." We shared a moment together before drifting off to sleep. Even after having 4 kids, we rarely went 2 days without being close. But it wasn't just about that. Showing your partner how much they mean to you is important. The smallest gestures often mean the most. We had been married for over 10 years, and our relationship was stronger than ever. All we had to do was look at Eli and Bill to see how easy it could be if we kept trying. I did wonder what my wife had planned for my birthday. It wasn't a big milestone yet. I knew my 40th would be significant, but that was still a couple of years away. After my wife fell asleep, I kissed her forehead and smiled at her peaceful expression before setting my thoughts aside. We didn't keep secrets unless we had to. Birthday? Yes, I could let her have this one. My birthday fell on a Sunday, and I woke up early to soft kisses. Lifting the sheets, I saw my wife working hard to surprise me. I moved the sheets aside and watched her happily until I asked her to join me. She leaned in for a kiss, and I turned her back, sharing a moment together. "Do you have plans for today?" I asked. "Too bad I can't have a baby. Having a little one on my birthday sounds nice," I joked. She laughed. "No more kids, Mark." She pulled me in for a gentle kiss. "But I do like the idea of us being together soon. Ever told you how much I love you? At least half a dozen times a day. That's it? I thought I increased the count. I said at least Mark. We managed to share some love before our kids burst into the room. Thankfully, they just came to wake us, saying they were hungry, then left. Samantha paused at the doorway, saying the room smelled funny. As soon as she disappeared, we both laughed. Being the birthday boy, I got a full English breakfast, thanks to Eli and Kathy. The kids enjoyed toast and juice before happily heading off to watch cartoons while the adults enjoyed a bit of quiet time over our meal. Samantha ended up on my lap, occasionally asking for a small spoonful of baked beans. In the living room, Eli and Bill entered with gifts for me, and Kathy brought more. I hadn't asked for anything, so I appreciated their thoughtfulness. Kathy settled beside me, snuggling in, while my two daughters were close, wanting to be near their dad on his special day. "Kelly is on her way," Kathy said after her phone buzzed. "Excited for a big steak?" Bill asked. "Size of a small table?" I joked. The adults laughed. Just as Bill was about to say something else, he paused. I'd better watch my words. Yes, we have some big ones to enjoy later. Kathy eventually moved, kissing my cheek before finding a daughter on either side of me. Michelle was reading a book while Samantha cuddled into me watching cartoons. I felt content, with Eli and Bill looking over occasionally, both just as happy as I was. I could tell what they were thinking, comparing the man who had come to their door many years ago to the man they saw now. "Mark, Kelly is here!" Kathy called from the doorway. I stood up, but the kids stayed put as I walked to the front door. Kathy was waiting there and kissed me quickly before opening it. As the doors to the car opened, Kelly got out from the driver's side with the two kids coming out next to her. Another young woman stepped out from the passenger seat. Suddenly my legs gave way and I fell to my knees watching her run towards me. My vision blurred with tears. I heard her shout a single word before she wrapped her arms around me, and I felt all my sadness released like a flood. She kept saying more words. "I love you so much, Daddy," she said softly. Katie. I was 5 years old when Sally took me away from my father. At first, I didn't really understand what was happening. The last time I spoke to Daddy on the phone, he promised he would see me on Friday. I knew the days. It was Wednesday night. He said he missed me and loved me, and we planned to go to the park on the weekend. But that never happened. Sally lied. I didn't get it then. We left our home on Thursday night and stayed in a hotel near the airport. When I asked what we were doing, Sally said we were going to surprise Daddy by flying to see him. I was so excited to see him first. I had no idea Sally would keep me asleep for the next 3 days. Later, I found out from the tickets that we flew from Sydney to London via Hong Kong. I slept almost the whole way. I woke up when we arrived in London and felt something was wrong. Even a 5-year-old can sense when things are off. Sally was next to me with a man I recognized but didn't know. "Where's Daddy?" I asked while we waited in line. Sally just shushed me. I kept asking because I felt confused. When I started to cry, she tried to pass me to the strange man. I didn't like that at all, so I screamed. I ended up in the back of a taxi with them. I noticed Sally was close to the man, being affectionate with him. "Where's Daddy?" I asked again. "I'll explain when we get home," Sally said. Home? We weren't home. This was a strange place I didn't know. Home was the apartment where Daddy was. The taxi stopped and Sally grabbed me, almost pulling me out. Nothing looked familiar and it was chilly. "Where are we?" I asked. "This is where we live now. This is our new home." "What about Daddy?" She bent down and made me look at her. "He doesn't love you. He never loved you. Your mother loves you. And Tony will be your new dad, and he will love you too." I knew that wasn't true. I might have been 5 years old, but I could tell a lot just by looking at someone. I didn't like Tony just by the way he looked. His eyes seemed untrustworthy, and Sally wasn't being honest. She had lied to me before, and even more to my real dad. Kids have a way of knowing when someone is not being truthful. We aren't as easy to fool as adults think. "Daddy loves me," I whispered. Sally held my shoulders tightly. "We live here now. We are your family. You'll learn to care for Tony as your new father. Your old dad was weak. He is nothing compared to Tony. He will give us everything we want. You'll see. Now, do you want to see your new home?" "No, I want to see my dad." Sally sighed and pulled me up the stairs into the house. I didn't like my new room. It felt cold. My clothes and toys were the same, but it didn't feel like home. Sally wanted me to call Tony Dad. I refused right away. "You will never be my dad," I told her within a week. Sally punished me for that. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. I went to a new school. I didn't like many of the kids there. The teachers were mean, and they insisted on calling me Belinda, not Katie. "No, my name is Catherine Samuels," I said. "Daddy calls me Katie." The teacher looked puzzled. "I'm sorry, but that's not what I have on my list. You are registered as Belinda Thompson." That night, Sally told me she had changed my name for my safety. I didn't understand what she meant, but I heard her talking quietly with the teacher and the principal. They told me my name was now Belinda. I was no longer Katie. If I had known how to express it, I would have told them to stop. "My name is Katie," I said, stomping my foot. "She'll learn soon enough," Sally said. I didn't like how she spoke. I found out why when we got home. Sally and whoever was there could call me whatever they wanted. But to me, I was Katie. I made sure to write that name down everywhere I could so I wouldn't forget it. After 6 months, Sally stopped trying to make me call Tony anything like Dad. He was just you, him, or Tony. I was sent to bed without dinner a few times a week for being disrespectful, but I didn't mind. Later, I learned they were trying to control me. Sally would say every day that my dad didn't love me, that he had forgotten me, that he had moved on and didn't care about me. She was lying. Every single day she lied. I never called her Mom, not at that age. Every time I told her, Daddy loves me. Sally hated that I didn't believe her. Things changed when she got pregnant when I was 8 years old. Once their son was born, I wasn't forgotten, but I just reminded them of my dad. When a daughter came 2 years later, I became just the oldest child in the house. They took care of me. They made sure I had food, clothes, and that I went to school. Tony stopped showing any kindness. When I was 10, I was glad he didn't want to be around me. Sally had stopped trying to control me. I asked about my father at least 3 times a week. I knew it annoyed Tony, so I made sure to ask him in front of Tony, who never dared to hurt me. I sometimes heard them arguing, especially one fight right before my 11th birthday. "Just send her back to Australia," Tony shouted. "She's my daughter. I'm not sending her back to that man," Sally replied. "Deal with her or I will. She's 10, and I get less respect from her than from the people I work with." "My daughter is not a bad person, Tony. Don't call her that." There was a pause. Then Sally said softly, "Maybe we should just send her to that boarding school, honey. Will that make you happy?" "I'm not wasting money on her. You handle it, Sally. I'm tired of this." I smiled to myself at the top of the stairs. I was getting to him. Good. On my 13th birthday, I hurried downstairs for breakfast. "Tony," I muttered. He grunted in reply. "Good morning, Sally," I said cheerfully. "What did you call me?" I pointed. "That's Tony," I pointed again. "And you're Sally." "I am your mother. You will call me that?" I laughed softly. "Yeah, and what a wonderful one you've been. So the same question. Where's my father, Sally?" She slapped me hard. It hurt a lot. My eyes filled with tears, and I stumbled back a bit. Even Tony seemed surprised, the newspaper rustling in his hands. "You ungrateful girl," Sally whispered. "All we've done is try to give you a better life." I rubbed my cheek with my hand. "Where's my daddy?" I asked quietly. "I know what you did, Sally. You took me away from him." "That's it. No birthday celebration for you. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve anything," she said angrily. "Fine by me." I enjoyed the look of shock on her face. I had known that word for a while, waiting for the right moment to use it. I heard a chair scrape as Tony stood up and moved closer. I looked at him, hoping he saw my anger. "If you touch me, Tony, I'll go straight to the authorities." I started to cry, making up an awful story about Tony. I surprised even myself with how vivid it was. Tony's face turned pale and he sat back down, knowing I was serious. Everything I said was a lie since I hadn't let him touch me in years, but I needed to make my point. "You terrible girl," Sally said quietly. I turned to her. "Just like my mother, it seems. This is how it will be, Sally. I won't go to boarding school." "I remember that talk. Did you know I heard what you said?" Her face turned even paler. She had lost her sun-kissed color over the years. You send me away and I say your husband is the kind of man who wouldn't last long in jail once they find out what he did. I will stay here until I finish school. Then I'm leaving to find my dad. I promise you that. I should have left you there, Sally said softly. For the first time I could remember, she seemed completely worn out. Yes, you should have. I've never forgotten, and I'll never forgive you. I looked back at Tony. He leaned away from me. If you do anything to keep me from going home, Tony, I will go straight to the authorities. I will share all the details needed to see you in trouble, and I'll make sure my mother joins you. He looked like he was going to be sick. I was 13 years old, and I felt like I had both of them in a tough spot. What Sally didn't realize was that I learned how to stand my ground from the best. My own mother. That was the one thing she did well. I kept a journal from the time I could write properly. When I got my own computer, I made an online diary, writing letters to my father almost every day. Now that I was older, I saw how Sally and Tony would leave me out. I was left behind when they went out with the other kids. I didn't mind. They took care of my needs, and Tony was smart enough to give me some pocket money. It all went into a bank account. I didn't have many friends, just those I could trust with the secrets of my life. The ones closest to me called me Katie, not Belinda. 3 of them knew my whole story, and soon enough I was spending a night or two each week with them. I'm not sure if Sally noticed I was missing. I feel like she didn't care by the time I was 14. I got a job as soon as I could, working at a fast food place, making sure to keep my grades up. That was one thing Sally couldn't complain about. Sally still went to her meetings. It was one of the few times she said something nice to me. By then, Tony barely spoke to me. I ignored him right back. We both liked it that way. As for my siblings, they seemed to be innocent victims. I barely knew them, to be honest. Tony made sure I had little to do with them, while I kept to myself. And as I got older, I wasn't home enough to spend time with them. I had no idea if Sally was influencing them. It wouldn't really matter. I thought Tony was waiting until I turned 18 so he could push me out. Growing up, I had social media, but I promised myself not to look for my father until I was old enough. When I turned 15, I started my search. The only problem was I didn't even know his first name. He had always just been Daddy to me. This meant I needed to find my documents. Mom kept everything in a box. One day when they were out, I took what I needed, including my passport. Luckily, it still had time left for me to return to Australia when I turned 18. My father's name was Mark Samuels. Sally had done some wrong things. I quickly figured out that my father wouldn't have signed some of the papers with his name on them. There were many Mark Samuels on social media, and the best place to search was Facebook. After weeks of trying, I couldn't find him. He must have set it to private, I said to myself. I had asked Sally what happened when she took me away from him, but she told me it was none of my business. I could have pressed her for more details, but by then, it seemed better to keep the peace than to start another argument. There had been plenty of those over the years. She knew how much I disliked her. A couple of months before I turned 16, I thought of a new plan to find him. Instead of looking for him, I could search for relatives. I struggled to remember names. I never knew my father's parents' names. I recalled Uncle Brian, but decided against looking for him. There was always something about him that made me uneasy. My father wasn't fond of him either. Then I thought of Auntie Kelly. She had always been nice to me, and my father liked her. I found her in just a day. That's when I saw how much had changed. He had changed his name to Mark Smith. On Kelly's profile, it said she had only one brother. My hand shook as I clicked on his name, and tears came as his profile loaded. There was a picture of my father and me, both smiling at the camera. I couldn't remember that day. It had been so long ago, but he used to take me to the park every weekend. Trees were in the background, and the photo was likely taken by one of the other mothers there. I remembered how they would look at him. Sometimes he would blush, and I wondered if they showed interest in him. Then I checked his profile. It read, "Father to 5 children, Katie." I couldn't read any further. Instead, I looked at the pictures. He had married and had 4 other children. It seemed he lived on a farm in the outback. Kelly looked like she was nearby, too. I didn't see any of the other family I remembered. Maybe they didn't keep in touch. Perhaps they were involved in my being taken from him. What really made me cry were the messages. Every year on my birthday and his, he wrote heartfelt notes, each one showing his love. I wanted to know more, so I clicked on the picture of his wife, Kathy Smith. Mother to 5 children, one unfortunately missing, but I love her just as much from everything I've been told. I can't wait to meet her someday. My father had married a good woman, someone better than Sally. They looked happy, in love, and dedicated to each other. The look in their eyes was the same as the love in all the pictures of my dad and me. Since I was 13, I had a plan. But now, it was time to change it. Sally and Tony had taken my dad away from me, and I felt like I needed to get back at them. It might seem childish, but I had read a lot and seen many movies. Even at my young age, I could think of a way to make them pay. I really wanted to reach out to him, but I didn't want to do it online. After so much time, it didn't feel right. I knew I would see him soon. I promised I would share everything with him once we were together again. I believed his wife and sister would support me later. Now, it was time to get my revenge in a small way. The next morning, I woke up and went to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror and tried to look sad. As I walked downstairs, Sally and Tony looked up at me in surprise. "Can I join you for breakfast, please?" I asked softly. I hadn't eaten breakfast with them in 2 years. Sally paused for a moment, then got up and fixed me a plate of bacon and eggs. She placed it in the empty spot and gave me a knife and fork. As she sat down again, she watched me. I moved over and took a seat. "Thank you, Mum," I said quietly. "What did you say?" she asked gently. Tony's eyes grew wide in surprise, too. "Thank you, Mom." I noticed Tony looking surprised again. The 2 younger kids didn't really pay attention. I ate quietly, trying to appear as sad as possible. There was a little bit of talk around the table. After I finished, I waited until they were done before I got up with them. I took my plate to the sink and washed it. Sally watched me as I approached her, clearly curious about what was happening. When I went to hug her, she seemed shocked. But as soon as I embraced her, I felt her arms wrap around me. "I'll see you after school, Mom." Later, when I got home from work, Sally was sitting alone in the living room. I sat down next to her on the couch, noticing she looked at me with curiosity again. Before she could ask anything, I forced myself to cry. I didn't just cry, I wailed and sobbed, falling apart as she held me tightly and rocked me. Wow, I was really good at acting. She didn't ask why I was upset, but I could tell she was smiling to herself. She knew I had been searching online. She wasn't unaware. She would probably start to put things together. I doubted she had looked for Mark Samuels anyway, and even if she had, he had likely blocked her. But she stopped caring about him after we left, so when she saw me crying in her arms, maybe it confirmed what she thought. "I'm so sorry," I cried. "I love you, Mummy." I had her hooked. She lifted my chin to meet my eyes. I had practiced this look in the mirror. I felt shattered and heartbroken, desperate for her love in return. She hugged me tightly and whispered that she would always love me. It would take time to forgive, but she understood. I was her daughter, and she would always love me. That night, I had dinner with them. I wasn't sure if they knew much about my life outside of school, so I decided to share. I mentioned that I worked after school and on the weekends. I had hoped to go back home, but that had changed. I couldn't quite call Tony Dad, but I promised to show him respect in his home. He had been there for me since I was 5, and I shouldn't take that for granted. I thanked him for everything and apologized for my past actions. It took time for them to believe me, but within a month, I had Sally fully convinced. She had her daughter back. As my birthday approached, we started going out together whenever I had time off. I received invitations to family events. Tony's parents came to visit and met the real me for the first time. I kept some distance from my siblings because I didn't want to hurt them with my plans, but I tried to be a good big sister by helping with their homework and playing games. I knew my mom was convinced, but Tony still had doubts. I had gotten used to listening in on conversations, and a couple of months after I turned 16, I overheard one. "I'm just not sure about this new Belinda," he said. "For over a decade, she's been gone. I know she didn't like me at all back then. She didn't even seem to like you. And now, just like that, she's a well-behaved young woman." I heard my mother laugh softly. "Honey, don't you get it? She found out about her father. He cut me off years ago, and I have no idea what he's been up to, but he might not even be around anymore. She's realized how alone she might be if he's not in her life, or maybe he's moved on and forgotten about her. Honestly, I don't care about him. I have my daughter back. I can forgive her for the past because I see love in her eyes for me again. Are you sure she's not just playing us? I still remember everything she said. I know the past still hurts, but there was no mistaking her sadness in those early weeks. She realizes she did us wrong and has apologized to me several times. You know she said the same to you. She won't call you Dad, and that's common for step-parents. But you have to admit she treats you like a father in every other way. He was quiet for a moment. I just wish she had been like this from the start, he said, a note of real sadness in his voice. We took her away from her father. I underestimated that bond, and I'm sorry. But keep in mind, while we were together at his parents' house, he was there for her, doing whatever they did while I wasn't there. And I can't forget the times you visited our apartment. I could tell he was suspicious, but I never gave him a reason to ask too many questions. I kept his attention on his daughter. I could look him in the eye and tell a lie without any trouble. Hearing all this made me really angry, but I held it back. I realized that Sally was involved with someone else. It just wasn't as disrespectful as I first thought. I can't believe his own parents set us up, he said, sounding smug. I really disliked the man. It felt wrong for him to act like I was his daughter, and I wanted to be sick afterward. And his brother was my best man at our wedding, plus his parents came to give you away. I barely remembered the wedding. I had disliked the whole day. I know they never liked our relationship or the fact I had a child, but since you were their friend, it worked out for everyone. You get the young wife, I get a great new life, and we take what's most important to him. I had to cover my mouth to stop a cry of sadness. How could they be so cruel? I couldn't take it anymore, so I quietly went back to my room. I cried on my bed the whole night, but it also made me more determined. I focused on showing love and kindness. I gave Sally constant hugs. I started calling Tony stepdad. I kissed his cheek and cuddled with him. He might have thought I liked him, but I kept it innocent, calling it father and daughter time. By the time I was 17, I had them eating out of my hand. The affection he didn't show before now came to me in waves. Sally treated me like her beautiful oldest daughter, proud of the young woman I was becoming. Behind my closed bedroom door, I laughed to myself. Sally thought she was clever, but I was outsmarting her. Tony loved to show me off, buying me the nicest dresses and taking me to garden parties. It was all pretend. I was just as fake as they were. Sally smiled widely. Tony told me he had never been prouder. As I grew up, I learned that I didn't like boys. I never told them about my personal life, and they mostly respected that. Sally would sometimes ask about boys, but I said I wasn't interested. I wanted to focus on my studies and work. I thought Tony would want me to stop working, but he admired my responsibility, and I played him well. With all his money, he would take my weekly pay and put the same amount in my bank account. Every time I would kiss his cheek and say, "Thank you, stepdaddy." I cringed inside every time I said it. While working at a popular restaurant chain, I met Jennifer. I was blonde with blue eyes and made sure to keep my skin tanned thanks to Sally booking me salon time each month. Jennifer had dark hair, hazel eyes, and a striking look. I fell in love by our second date. The first time we kissed, I felt sure about what I wanted. After 2 months of dating, I opened up to her. She was surprised, but not shocked. Coming from a wealthy family, she understood people well. "My parents can be difficult," she said. "I'm lucky to be an only child, so they focus all their attention on me. I could push back against them, but that wouldn't help me." She called me Katie. We both knew we liked each other, but I wanted to take my time. She agreed to wait. What made me fall in love with her completely was what she said 3 months before my 18th birthday when I revealed my feelings. "I want to be with you." We made plans over the next few months. I would turn 18 before my father turned 38. This gave me 4 months to prepare. As the well-behaved daughter, Tony and Sally threw me a big birthday party. Friends and family came. Thankfully, no one from Australia attended, but all of Tony's family was there. Tony looked at me with pride. I wondered if he thought about the past. Sally was especially loving, proud that her first daughter was growing up. Jennifer was there that night and experienced everything for the first time. We went to the bathroom together, and after I washed my hands, I kissed her softly. "You're a great actress, Katie," she whispered. "I'm a little worried. When I say I love you, I really mean it, Jen. I know, they have no clue. It's funny." When I got home that night, Tony and Sally hugged me tightly, saying how much they loved me. Once they went to bed, I kept smiling until the door closed. Then, I focused on what I needed to do. First, I needed an adult passport. That was easy to get from the Australian High Commission. Living in London, I just took the Underground. I had all the documents I needed and had the passport sent to my workplace. Jennifer and I secretly got married within a week and worked on getting her a spousal visa. While it was being processed, I slowly moved some of my things out of my room. Each time I took a small backpack, but as the days went by, more and more of my belongings ended up at her nearby apartment. She had moved out of her home during our last year of school after some conflict with her mother, but her father helped her by paying bills and giving her an allowance. Finally, there was one last thing I needed to do. One evening at Jennifer's place, I logged onto Facebook for the first time in months. I'd been using the name Belinda Thompson for years. I created a new profile as Catherine Samuels, uploaded a recent photo, and reached out to Kelly. She accepted my friend request right away and opened a chat window. Instead, I decided to call her through the app and put the phone on speaker. "Hello, Kelly, it's Katie." "Oh my gosh," she whispered. "Is it really you?" "It's Catherine Samuels. My dad called me Katie. We used to live in Wentworthville. I can't remember the address, but I recall it was a nice apartment, always bright. We lived on the bottom floor. My room was across from my parents'. The walls were light blue. My mother is Sally Samuels, but she goes by Sally Thompson now. Kelly, they took me away from my dad." Jennifer held my hand tightly. I wiped my eyes. "Kelly, I want to go home. I need to see my dad." "I have to tell—" "No, not yet." "Katie, why? He really wants to hear from you." "It's a long story and I'll explain it, but you have to trust me. I've been planning this since I was 13. She gasped. "I wanted to call every day, but I had my reasons. Sally took me from my family. I won't leave until I'm sure I can fix things. Please, let me handle this my way." "Are you all right?" "Sally is very controlling. She's hurt me mentally for years. I know some might think I've become like her. I haven't. I've just done what I needed to push back. I know that sounds bad. You've been hurt as much as your dad. Is he okay, Kelly?" "He still loves you, Katie. He's never lost hope. But he never found out where you were. He tried the police, private investigators, searched online. There were many wrong leads, but nothing worked. He has hoped for 13 years, Katie. He always believed he would see you again, even if he was old and sick." That made me break down, and Jennifer held me as I cried. "What's your plan, Katie?" I told her. Kelly asked when I wanted to come back. "His birthday is in 2 weeks," I said. "He'll be 38. I want to surprise him. Let me call his wife at least. She'll want to know. You can trust her to keep it quiet. If you're sure. They don't like keeping secrets from him, but this one will be worth it. I've already booked my flights. I'll send you the details. I can get to Brisbane, but from there. Once I have the details, I'll arrange flights to Longreach. That's not a problem. One more thing, Kelly. I'm married to a woman. Her name is Jennifer." I gave Jennifer a little nudge. "Hi there," she said, sounding shy. I smiled, surprised to hear her like this. Kelly laughed. "Now that's a lovely English accent. Hello, Jennifer, I'm Kelly." "Nice to finally talk to someone from back home. I can't wait to meet your family, especially your dad." "I know everything, of course. Well, as long as his daughter is happy, he'll be glad to meet her wife." The next week and a half felt very slow. I kept pretending to be the good daughter for both of them. I felt bad about leaving my siblings behind, but that wasn't my fault. The night before I was going to leave, I had a backpack packed with everything I needed at Jennifer's place. I had already sent a box of important things I wanted to keep. My room still looked lived in. I didn't want to give any hints that I was planning to go. "I have the day off tomorrow, so I probably won't see you until dinner," I said. "I could use a little break. I've been working all the time." "Of course, sweetie," Sally said. "Take a day for yourself. I can't remember the last time you took it easy. Maybe you should treat yourself to something nice." I smiled at her. "Sure, Mom. Maybe a little pampering. I'm on my feet all day." The offer to work with my company is still there, Belinda, Tony said, smiling at me. But I know you want to find your own path, too. Maybe when I'm older. I'm thinking about taking some college courses. That could help. That's a great idea. I can help you get started. If you get the right qualifications and work as hard as I know you can, you'll go far. Thanks, I said, feeling shy. That night, I barely slept. Sally and Tony hugged me goodnight before they headed to their rooms. I hugged Sally for a long time, wanting to tell her my plans for the next day. But I let her go, told her I loved her, and watched her smile before she closed her door. I was only taking a small bag with me the next day. My alarm went off at the time I knew the house would be empty. I made sure everything was clear, took one last shower in the house, got dressed, grabbed my backpack, and checked one last time to make sure I had everything. I left behind the gifts I had received since I was 15 and had changed. As I walked downstairs, I placed my keys on the kitchen table. I didn't leave a note. I didn't feel they needed any explanation from me. As I stepped outside, I heard a horn beep. I closed the door behind me and saw Jennifer waiting in a taxi. "Our things are in the back," I asked as I got in next to her. She kissed my cheek and nodded. "Next stop, London Heathrow then." I had an Australian passport, and Jennifer had a British passport. I had taken her last name, so I was Belinda Williams on my passport. The flight was through Singapore, and it was only during the landing into Brisbane that I started to feel nervous. More than that, Jennifer had to comfort me as I cried a little. I was finally so close after a long time. My phone lit up with messages from Sally as we went through immigration, wondering where I was. I could sense her worry, probably thinking I had gone missing or something worse. I felt a small sense of relief. I ignored the messages and focused on getting through the border guard. They looked at my documents first, then checked hers. The visa was correct, and after answering a few questions, we passed through. We collected our bags and saw Kelly waiting for us. There were tears as we hugged. "I remember you being so small," she whispered. I had grown to 5'8", but still stayed slim. Jennifer was 5'10", tall for a woman. With some heels, she looked amazing. Kelly put her hands on my shoulders and looked me up and down. "Mark is... Does he suspect anything?" "Not at all. Kathy feels very guilty about keeping this secret, but Mark will understand once everything is explained. Come on, our flight leaves in an hour." During the flight, I could see Kelly had many questions, but she kept it simple. She asked about our flight and how Jennifer and I met. When we landed in Longreach, Jennifer quickly learned how intense the heat could be. I hadn't felt anything like it in years, but she soon went to change into shorts and a light top. Kelly giggled and reminded her to wear plenty of sunblock because of her pale skin. "We'll get her used to the sun soon enough," Kelly said as we got into her car. "I'll help with that," I added. Kelly smiled. Jennifer gave me a knowing look. She didn't take me back to her house, worried that her 2 kids might find out. Instead, we booked a hotel since we had arrived a couple of days early to recover from jet lag. "Get some rest, and we'll head to the farm on Sunday. Katie, you're coming with me. Jennifer, you'll go with my husband. We'll go together so you won't miss too much." The night before I was to see him, I couldn't sit still. I felt nervous and spent half the time in tears. I knew I needed something to help calm me, so my wife and I shared a special moment together. At first I felt overwhelmed, but then I remembered it was a new experience for us both. I noticed she was crying too, and we connected through our shared feelings. "Your first time too?" I asked, and she nodded, tears on her cheeks. We exchanged another kiss. "Sorry for waiting so long," I thought. "We've talked about it, but..." She kissed me deeply. "I knew you wanted to wait until you were home. And Katie, you were definitely worth it. I love you so much." That night, I cuddled close, feeling her arms around me. I finally managed to fall asleep. Sometime during the night, we shared another tender moment, this time feeling more at ease. Even though we were both new to this, we quickly discovered what made us feel good. On my back, feeling her softly touch me, I experienced joy in ways I had never known before. I eventually drifted off, hearing her soft laughter that made it easy to sleep through the night. She was right. "Nervous?" Katie asked as she picked me up Sunday morning. "I've been waiting 13 years for this day." So has your dad, she sighed. He really did everything he thought possible. Some people might say he could have done more, but unless he had traveled himself to visit every... Sally and Tony took me away, Kelly. I was taken, held against my will. Think of anything you can when a child is separated from their parent. I showed her my phone, filled with messages I hadn't read. She's really worried now, I said, giving her a look that said it all. Her perfect daughter is about to show her that I have learned a lot. It was a half-hour drive to the farm where my dad lived. Longreach and the surrounding countryside felt completely different from London. The sky was big and mostly blue, with a few clouds scattered about. It was very warm. Fields stretched as far as I could see, mostly brown and yellow, but with some green here and there. And there were a lot of sheep, thousands, if not millions. As we turned into the driveway, the house was quite large, with a smaller cottage beside it. Kelly called Kathy to let her know we had arrived. A woman appeared at the door, revealing a beautiful woman with brown hair. Okay, kids, let's go see the family. They were excited to see their cousins. As I stepped out of the car, a man came out of the door, smiling at his sister and the kids before looking at me. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Daddy!" I shouted. I watched him drop to his knees as I ran toward him, sliding along the dirt until I crashed into his strong chest. His arms hugged me tightly, and I could feel him crying as he held me. I didn't mind. I closed my eyes and felt joy for the first time in 13 years. I was home. "I love you so much, Daddy," I whispered. He couldn't speak for a moment. I had never heard someone cry like that. My cheeks were wet too. "I love you just as much, Munchkin," he finally whispered, making me giggle. That had been my childhood nickname. He leaned back, wiping his eyes with my sleeve. I'm home, Daddy." I kissed his cheek and hugged him tight again. "I'm home." That made him hug me even tighter. I closed my eyes and cherished the feeling of being held by my dad again. After a moment, he calmed down, clearing his throat and gently stroking my cheek before showering my face with kisses, causing me to giggle again. "I've missed so much," he whispered, "so very much." "No, you haven't. I made sure you didn't." He stood up, helping me to my feet. Clearing his throat again, he looked at his sister. "You found her?" Kelly pointed at Kathy. "You too?" Kathy was crying, and my father held her tightly, thanking her many times before he did the same to his sister. "She found us, Mark," Kelly said. "But we can explain everything later. I think you should introduce some people." He took my hand and pulled me close. "Katie, I want you to meet my wife, Kathy. We've been married for over 10 years. These are our children, your brothers and sisters. Matthew, Michelle, Richard, who prefers Ricky, and Samantha. Kids, this is your sister, Katie." Samantha was an adorable little girl. Ricky was shy but very kind. Michelle looked just like her mother, and Matthew was a little version of his dad. I hugged each of them tightly, and then Kathy hugged me for a long time before she softly said, "Welcome home, my long-lost daughter." He took my hand again and introduced me to 2 more people. "Katie, this is my mother Eli and my father Bill." When I glanced at him, he shook his head. "It's a long story. These people have shown me more love since I've been here than I got in 25 years before that." They hugged me warmly. "Welcome home, dear," Eli said. It felt so genuine. While Bill hugged me, I saw Eli hug my father, and he was emotional in her arms. The love between them was clear. I understood right away why he called them Mom and Dad. My wife had arrived during the introduction, standing back to let the family reconnect. Dad then noticed she was next to Jim and his niece and nephew. "Who's this?" he asked. Pointing to my wife, she walked towards me and took my hand. I looked at my dad, and his smile was instant. "Dad, this is my wife, Jennifer. Jennifer, this is my father, Mark Smith. He's been waiting for this moment for 13 years, just like I have." "My little girl is married?" he whispered, and I could feel his emotion. My wife and I hugged him tightly. "Only so she could join me here, Dad. We're going to do this right, with my true family." "What about yours, Jennifer?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't care about them. They're not worth it." Dad laughed. "Looks like we have something in common." He let us go, and the smile on his face seemed like it would never fade. "I guess we have a lot to talk about." We do, Dad. He smiled. For 5 years, he was always Dad. At 18, he was still my dad. What do you want to be called? Whatever you wish, Katie. What's important is that you're home again. Then I think it'll be both, depending on the situation. But I prefer Dad. I have 13 years to catch up on. Me too, little one. Me too. Jim and my father grabbed our things. There were plenty of rooms, but I heard him ask Michelle if she was okay sharing with her little sister. She was a clever girl and understood things well. Samantha was excited about the thought of sharing a room with her older sister. There was only a small bed in the room, and my father told me to wait while he took Jim away. Half an hour later, they came back with a larger bed and mattress, carefully bringing it up the stairs and placing it in the room. My daughter is here with her partner, he said once everything was set up. Naturally, they will share the bed. Jennifer turned red. I couldn't help but laugh a little. My parents did the same when your dad moved in with me, Kathy explained. This is your home now, Dad added, for as long as you want. I hugged him tightly. Can it be forever? What about your partner? Please, you've already made such a big impact. I'd choose to live with you over my family any day. Your family? Oh, you. I had no idea, he said softly. No one could ever find you. I leaned back to look at him. They changed my name, I said sadly, pulling out my passport. He took it and glanced at it, sighing. Dad, she did something wrong. I have all the papers. They forged your name. It could have been your brother or father. I noticed a flash of anger. I mean, Brian and John, sorry. Not your fault, kiddo. He looked at it again. Thompson, so that was his last name? I nodded. She married him? I sighed. Made me a flower girl and everything. I hated it. Your brother was his best man. Your parents came to give her away. Kathy gasped, and Dad sighed again, handing the passport back. I'm not surprised by anything I learn about those people anymore. There's a lot more, Dad, but today is your birthday, and I have a special gift for you. He smiled. Apart from you being here? You'll see. I've waited long enough for this. Mark, I couldn't stop holding her hand, hugging her and taking in the scent of her hair. I kissed her cheeks and forehead, just looking at her and feeling overwhelming happiness. The smile never left her face as she stayed close to me. I quietly told Kathy that she was going to have a wonderful evening as a thank you. I hope you're not the only one, my daughter whispered, looking at her partner. I glanced at my daughter, who was blushing while sipping her drink. What? She asked playfully. Just remember, you're not that little girl anymore. She climbed onto my lap, resting her head on my chest. I'll always be your little girl, Daddy, she whispered. I made sure to bring everything that shows how much I missed you. They're just photos. They mean a lot to me. I can picture it all. You were always with me, Daddy. In my heart. Me too, sweetheart. Thinking of this day kept me going sometimes. She looked at me knowingly. She understood what I was saying. I kissed her cheek. I won't tell you how hard it was. Just know you kept me going. Each day I woke up thinking about seeing my daughter again. We ate around noon, and the steak was as big as promised. I hardly touched any drink, wanting to enjoy every moment. Jennifer was beautiful. No surprise my daughter loved her. She was funny and sharp, but also had sweet moments. Her love for my daughter was clear. It didn't matter to me that my daughter loved a woman. What mattered was her happiness and that her partner was kind. That's all a parent wants. We talked easily for hours. Katie played with her siblings and cousins, likely wishing she had been around more. Matthew adored her. He had a new big sister, and he was already looking up to her. By evening, my 4 kids with Kathy had all taken to Jennifer. Everyone liked her. As night came, the younger kids were sent to bed. The rest of us gathered in the living room with Kelly and Jim choosing to stay with their parents for the night. Daddy, Katie said, cuddling next to me. We have a lot to discuss, but there's one thing I need to do tonight. What's that? I need to talk to someone. How? I asked carefully. I have my laptop in my bag. Your TV looks like it can connect to the internet. It has a camera. I want to see her reaction when I tell her the truth. She only knows I've been gone for a few days and has been calling me a lot, along with Tony. She looked at me, seeing the tears in my eyes. I'll probably need help after this, Dad. I don't like who I had to become to handle everything. I've done some difficult things. You'll get all the support you need. They hurt us both in different ways. Kathy's family helped me heal, and now your whole family, including your wife, will help you too. She waited for the right moment, which was morning in the UK. She asked us to stay in the kitchen while she prepared everything. I didn't watch, but soon I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 13 years. I froze, feeling my fists clench. Kathy placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. There were only a few people who could upset me that quickly. Belinda, we've been so anxious. Where are you? Tony and I have reported you missing. Hello, Sally, my daughter replied coldly. Just a moment. There are some people you should meet. That was my signal to join her. I walked into the living room and sat next to my daughter. She leaned against me and I kissed the top of her head before turning to look at the screen. I hadn't seen her in a long time. She had clearly changed her appearance in a big way. She didn't look good at all. I remembered Sally as a young, beautiful woman, but I could barely recognize the woman on the screen. Her eyes widened in surprise. I stayed silent. Mark, she whispered. Kathy came in next, sitting beside Katie. She leaned over to give me a kiss and then kissed Katie on the cheek. Jennifer arrived shortly after, choosing to sit on the floor between Katie's legs where my daughter played with her hair. Eli and Bill sat next to Kathy and me while Kelly and Jim stood behind us. The look on Sally's face was shocking. Meet my family, Sally. This is my daddy. You took me away 13 years ago and... No, Stop it, Jennifer shouted. You don't speak now. You will listen. Then you will forget about Katie. I thought for a moment that Sally would end the call, but I remembered how she was. She would try to persuade, manipulate, and even intimidate. As I was saying, you took me away 13 years ago. You and Tony. How does it feel to have that hurt you caused come back to you? Oh, I love you so much, Mom. I'm so sorry for being so rude. Oh, I love what you've done to me. She made some kissing sounds. This is my mother, Kathy. Remember how I said you lost that title long ago? Kathy has earned that title in just the one day I've known her. On either side are Bill and Eli, my grandparents. And you probably remember Kelly. She was affected by everything you did. She has spoken the truth. Mark knows everything you did. You hurt him. You ruined our family. This will be the last time you hear from me, Sally. And I know much more than you think. I have all the papers with me that show you and whoever helped you faked my father's signature. Just taking me out of the country like you did was completely against the law. But if I wanted, I could report everything to the police and talk about 13 long years of mental suffering. Sally shook her head. No, we never... I heard enough over the years, Sally. The talks you thought were private. I glanced at Katie, who had a sly smile on her face. I heard all the things Tony said about me over the years. And here's the funny part, he was actually right. How does it feel now, Sally? Your heart was full of love for your oldest daughter. Now you know that was a lie. I've disliked you since the day you took me from my daddy. I disliked Tony from the moment he came into my life. You've hurt my dad in such a bad way. I don't just dislike you. I truly wish you weren't around at all. She took a deep breath. But you can't hurt me anymore, she said softly. I'm back home with my daddy. I know you tried to hurt him on purpose with the help of Tony, Brian, John, and Cheryl. I know all your secrets. I will tell Dad everything I know. I understand it will hurt him, but he deserves to know the truth. I can sit back and smile at how I outsmarted all of you because I learned from the best. Sally had her head in her hands. She was crying. How does it feel? I said sharply, while Kelly gently touched my shoulder. Sally looked up at me. All I ever wanted. No one here cares what you want, Katie interrupted. I'm here with my family now. My mom and dad, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, and my wife. You're what? Sally said in surprise. I'm a lesbian, Sally. We got married as soon as I turned 18. It was so she could come home with me. This is your home. It was never my home. It was just where I lived. I waited until I was older. I learned, I planned, and then I played you all perfectly. You all believed me. I could have been an actress, but it has left me with scars. But Dad will help me now. He'll help his little girl, the one you took from him. All that money Tony gave me, I saved it, and now I have a nice little sum to use. All the gifts, I left them behind. My love couldn't be bought. But I've got the papers. I will talk to a lawyer and see if anything can be done. If it can, I will return to the UK to see you and Tony in a courtroom, facing whatever they can bring against you." She leaned closer. "I might just use the same threat I made when I was 13. My word against his. You know I'm a good actress, Sally. Who do you think they'll believe?" I felt uneasy at her tone and the unspoken threat. It was clear what she might accuse him of. I gently pulled her back, and she looked at me with a smile, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I kissed her forehead, hearing her sigh as she settled back against me. "You tried to break me," I finally said. "I worked hard. I took care of you and my child. I was never violent. I never threatened anyone or tried to scare you. I only showed you love. I can understand if it wasn't enough for someone, but to do what you did with my parents' help is hard to believe. It was cruel. Katie is home now. She will stay with me for as long as she needs. You don't need to know where she is. You are no longer her mother. You are no longer her family. She has everything she needs here. You made me miss 13 years of her life. You made me miss so much. I should be angry at you. I should be filled with rage. But you know what? I feel sorry for you. You are sad, and in a way I have won. To be honest, there aren't really any winners or losers in this situation, but I can sit here with my daughter cuddled up next to me and smile. I've won. I've got my daughter back. I have a wife I love and care for, and she feels the same way about me. "You're the light of my life," my wife whispered. I enjoyed seeing how Sally reacted. She could feel the love in those simple words. My wonderful wife has given me 4 children. I love my parents too. Not John and Cheryl, they are no longer part of my life. I mean Eli and Bill, who are here with me. Eli has hugged me more than Cheryl ever did, and Bill is my father. That's it. My sister is back in my life, and she has shared everything with me, Sally. I know who you really are. You have a cold heart and a dark spirit. I feel sorry for your children being raised by you and him. They have a tough road ahead. Katie will have my support no matter what she decides. I hope there's a way to address what you did to us. But I also don't want her to feel that pain again. As for me, I say bring it on. Nothing would please me more than seeing you face consequences for your actions. I know it sounds like a dream, but if Katie can perform as well as I think she can, I could see both of you facing time away for what happened. It will depend on Katie's choice. Get ready for a surprise visit, Katie warned. I looked around. Does anyone else want to say something? I have a lot to say, but it's no use, Kathy replied. You're not the only one who has won, Gigi. Gigi? Katie asked. Gentle giant, I said softly. This made her giggle and snuggle closer to me. I shut my eyes and kissed her forehead. Love you, Munchkin. I love you, Daddy. When I opened my eyes, I saw Sally's face. She looked sad and upset. I should have enjoyed the moment, but she seemed so low. But more importantly, broken. Goodbye, Sally. I don't think we'll meet again, I said, leaning forward to cut off contact before I blocked her. The next few days were emotional. Katie and I spent a lot of time talking about everything. She wanted me to be truthful about everything, and I warned her it might upset her. But she insisted that I was her daddy, and I would help her feel better. Sharing those first few months was hard for her. I spent an entire week assuring her I was no longer trapped by those feelings. Kathy had helped me heal, and having her home meant my life was finally coming together. As for Katie, she tried to share all the things that happened. But the moment that truly broke my heart was when she showed me her diaries from each year since she was 9. I wanted to keep them safe, but my teachers found them and told Sally, so I had to hide them better after that. I read her diaries over the months. They weren't daily entries, but I would lie back on the bed with Katie snuggled next to me, and she would explain certain moments as I read. There were tears from both of us at points. Then came the time when she was 15, when she discovered my presence. Dear Daddy, I found you! My goodness, I can't believe I actually found you, and you still care about me. Sally has been saying for years that you stopped loving me. She even wished you were gone, but you're here, and you have a new family. But you haven't forgotten me. I'm 15, Dad. I'm too young to travel across the world to find you, but I'm clever. Smarter than Sally and Tony think. I've learned from her how to act, how to treat people, and how to get what I want. I've paid attention, Dad. I'm going to be better than Sally. I'm going to feel bad about what I need to do, but I have to do it. She hurt you deeply, Dad. She hurt me too. I dislike her. I really dislike her, but I have to set that aside for what comes next. I need to make her feel just a little of the pain she caused you and me. That means I will have to become someone different for the next 3 years. I have a plan in my mind. I'm not sure if it will work, but I've watched Sally closely for years. I wish I could send you a message right now, Dad, to tell you how much I love you, how much I miss you, and that I'm hurting just like you. But we'll be together again soon, I promise. 3 years will be tough for both of us, but I need to do this for us. Love you so much, Katie. Her last note was the day before she left. Dear Dad, I look in the mirror and see someone I hardly know. In many ways, I am like my mother. I really did learn from her. The only person who has helped me through these past 18 months is Jennifer. She's the light of my life. I know there will be 2 unforgettable days for me. The first was marrying my wife. The second will be the day we see each other again, Dad. I'm already dreaming about that moment, wondering what it will be like. I often get emotional as I think about it with Jennifer while we're at her place. I'm in the house I've lived in since I was 5. Sally and Tony have no idea what I'm planning for tomorrow. They still believe I'm the perfect daughter who loves her mother dearly and cares more for her stepfather than for you. Gross. I honestly don't know how I've gotten through this sometimes, Dad. It's been really hard, but I had to keep the plan in mind. This has to hurt, as much as I know it hurt you. I don't really care about Tony, but it has to hurt Sally. For 3 years, I've shown her nothing but love and kindness every single day. She has no idea what I'm about to do. My things are ready at Jennifer's. She's arriving by taxi tomorrow morning. The house will be quiet. Tony will go to work. Sally will take the kids to school before meeting her friends. I do feel a little sorry for the kids, but it's Sally and Tony's doing. They can say what they want about me when it's all over. I look around this room and see things meant to win my love. But that never worked, Dad. I try really hard to remember my childhood, but it's been so long that the memories are fading. What I do recall is laughter and the park. It was simple, but I remember you pushing me on the swing and helping me spin around. You'd chat with other parents while I played with my friends. Some of the other mothers seemed to like you, Dad. Sometimes I wish you were with one of them instead of Sally. This will be my last note, Dad. Tomorrow, my wife and I will fly to Singapore briefly before heading to Brisbane. Auntie Kelly will meet us there before we continue to Longreach. Then, on Sunday, I will see my dad for the first time in a long time. I'm crying again, Dad, but it's all right. I'm crying happy tears. I won't have to lie to myself anymore. I will be free. My wife will be with me as I finally see my real family after so long. I know I'm going to be very nervous. I hope our first meeting is everything I wish it to be. I'll see you soon, Dad. I love you so much. I've never stopped since the day I was taken. It's my love for you that kept me strong. Your loving daughter, Katie Therapy, helped me a lot. I really needed it. Dad joined me after a while to talk about what happened. The therapist was worried after I shared everything I'd been through, but seeing the genuine love between my dad and me eased those worries. We talked about our feelings and worked through everything together. I continued going to sessions every couple of weeks, but my dad was very strong. Kathy, Eli, and Bill had been his therapists long ago. I never pursued any legal actions against Sally and Tony. After our last talk, Dad didn't think about them again, although he offered support if I wanted to confront them. It took a while, but therapy helped me move on, and I eventually forgot they existed. Since they have no way to reach us, we haven't heard from them at all. Kelly still hears news from Sydney. John has passed away from a heart attack 2 years after I came home. Kelly told my dad, and he barely reacted. It was like hearing about a stranger. It didn't mean anything to him. Cheryl is already with a new partner, supposedly the man she had been seeing for a long time. Brian is single and struggling to help support 3 ex-wives, and he's close to becoming an alcoholic. The farm was sold for a lot of money. My grandfather retired and moved to the northeast coast with my grandmother, buying a small house in a retirement community. Dad, Mom, my brothers and sisters, Jennifer and I, Kelly, and Jim all moved nearby, although we settled into a larger town not far away. Dad found a job again as a civil engineer, just like before. Mom surprised everyone by saying she would be a stay-at-home mother but would do some part-time work. Jennifer and I? We moved in next door. Kelly, Jim, and my cousins. Dad and Jim bought 3 pieces of land and made sure our homes were built just how we wanted them. Even though Dad had enough money that he didn't need to work, he liked to keep busy. He would always be home by 6 in the evening at the latest. He told his company that if they ever gave him too much work, he would quit right away. The memories of the past still affected him. Kathy would never do that to him, though. She cared for my father deeply. Jim also started his own job, making sure he worked close to home because he was devoted to Kelly and their kids. My grandfather finally retired by the ocean, which is what he wanted. It was a Saturday. Dad was packing his kids into their minivan. They were good kids, well-behaved, and polite. Matthew was now 15, like a younger version of my father. Michelle was beautiful. She would have to be careful when she started dating. Ricky was still shy, but discovering his own personality. Samantha was just too cute for her own good. Dad spoiled her a bit. In a way, he was sharing moments with her and Michelle that he missed while I was growing up. Sometimes he would look at me, and I could see a flash of sadness in his eyes. We would share a long hug, reminding each other that everything was okay now. I couldn't go a day without seeing Dad, and I hugged him as often as I could. There were 13 years of hugs to catch up on. As for Jennifer and me, we packed our car with our 2 young boys. Each of us had given birth to one. We used special methods to have the kids, but Jennifer joked that my father could have been the one to help her after I had our first. He has great genes, she joked. I laughed at that. When she brought it up during our next visit, Kathy couldn't stop laughing, especially watching my father turn red as Jennifer explained why she thought it was a hilarious idea. "I've never had a man before," she said playfully. "Only the fake stuff." "Jennifer!" I exclaimed, feeling embarrassed. "That's my dad." "I'm sure he's seen things like that before," she replied with a grin. Kathy laughed even harder, leaning next to my father, who was blushing deeper. Then he looked at me. "Your wife is a handful sometimes. Is she not getting enough love at home?" "I assure you she gets plenty, Dad. Want to know details?" "No, I've heard enough already," he replied. I felt the heat in my cheeks again. Kathy continued to laugh. I guess we hadn't always been the quietest family. We sometimes overheard them too, and I was just happy my father made Kathy so joyful. "Jennifer, thank you, but I had a small operation after our 4th child." Darn. There goes that idea. "Trust me, Jen, he would just look at me and then I could feel the baby moving," Kathy said. "He needed to take some steps to help us out. Using condoms isn't fun and the pill makes me feel off." It was a short drive to the beach where we would meet our grandparents. No surprise that our grandfather was already in the ocean. He loved to swim early in the morning and again in the evening. The waves were good enough that he might even try to surf a bit. Dad had liked surfing when he was younger, so he showed his dad some moves, while Jim and Matthew also had their own boards. We were getting together just because we were family and enjoyed each other's company. Living together at the farm was great. Jennifer and I went to university at home and found jobs that let us work from there, too. Anyone who complains about being with their partner all day probably isn't happy. Jennifer and I loved spending time together, especially since we timed our breaks to share special moments. Our kids were old enough to understand that they had 2 moms and no dad. We explained it as simply as we could, and my father was just as important to the kids as any dad would be. Long ago, my father had allowed himself to feel feelings again. When I handed him his first grandson, he was so emotional. After he returned the baby to me, he kissed my forehead and whispered how much he loved me. I understood. Our little family had grown even bigger. It was a beautiful spring day. The weather was warm, but a cool breeze from the ocean kept us comfortable. Almost everyone jumped in the water for a swim before gathering back on the beach. A cricket bat and a tennis ball came out for a game. We set up a barbecue to cook some food. We opened snacks to share around, and no one really had drinks. We didn't need them. Dad put on a shirt and shorts, took my hand, and then took the hand of his wife as we walked away from the others. After a few minutes, we cuddled up against Dad, who we loved dearly. Mom loved him so much that sometimes you worried about what would happen if anything ever changed. My love for Dad was strong, too. My wife joked that she sometimes feared she would wake up and find me next door snuggled with Mom and Dad, as I often did at the farm. Kathy thought it was cute, a way to make up for all the times I had missed Dad's hugs after a bad dream, or the cozy mornings when I would wake them up with tickles. We paused, taking in the sight of the ocean, standing quietly as we listened to the waves crashing on the sand. A gentle wind blew sand against our legs. "I love you both so much," my father said gently. "I don't know how to say it perfectly. The truth is that you both gave me a reason to live. You took a man who was lost, Kathy, and helped him heal with all the love you shared. Your love for me helped you too, Munchkin, just as my love for you helped me." He took a breath. "I have too many best days to count. The first best day was when you were born, Munchkin. I remember promising to do my best for you and give you a good life. Through all the ups and downs, I believe I've kept that promise. The next best day was marrying your mother. I hope I made her proud." She kissed his cheek. "You've done so much more than that," she whispered, her voice shaking a little. "After that, seeing my sister again after 5 years, we both felt a weight lift off our shoulders. We remind each other that everything is okay now. We are family again. The woman I see now is so different from the one I grew up with. Then the best days came with the birth of my other 4 children. Honestly, my heart feels so full every time I walk into a room and see them all together. Other best days? Reuniting with my first daughter and every beautiful day since. No matter how difficult things can be, I remember who is waiting for me at home." He kissed my cheek. "My firstborn." He kissed my mother lovingly. "The love of my life," he said softly. "I love you, Daddy," I whispered, kissing his cheek. Then I walked back to my wife, who met me with a gentle kiss. I turned to look at my father and his wife. I noticed how he brushed his fingers over her ear and gently touched her cheek. The look they shared showed a deep love for each other. The kiss they exchanged. It was clear how much they cared for one another. I snuggled into my wife. Watching my parents didn't feel strange. It was just 2 people who were still very much in love. Eventually, they noticed us watching, and both laughed as Kathy rested her head on his chest. "I love you too," she said silently, looking at me. It was hard to tell if she meant one thing or the other, but it was probably both. Taking my hand, my wife guided me back towards our family. "Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.